Okay, welcome everybody. I'm back here again. It's been 2 weeks, and I'm back here with our old friend Bosco from Saints and Scholars, and we're going to basically do a discussion tonight, kind of building on the last one, dealing with conspiracy and skepticism in modern times. And tonight one is going to take that forward, and we're going to talk about power, and particularly liberalism and power is the topic. And this it will. It'll take us into a number of areas. We're going to talk about a few foundational kind of thinkers to our own ideas on this, and we'll bring it up to date with current events. I'm sure too throughout. We'll probably veer into a few tangents here and there. I'm just going to do a quick audio check, and I'm just going to invite Bosco to unmute and come on in and say hello.
Hi, Don. How are you getting on?
Very good, very good. Good to have you here.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and our audio looks good. Okay, so yes, the team. My initial kind of thoughts on this. Oh, by the way, Bosco, you can see his links in the description of this stream on YouTube. We're live on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, and X. And Bosco has Saints and Scholars Substack, which is one of the best Substacks coming out of Ireland right now. And he has the Telegram channel. And you can find my links in the link tree as well below. So if you want to follow me on any of those areas, those places. Now, my initial thoughts on kind of liberalism and power, I kind of take a lot from people like, although I'm not far from an expert on him, but I take a lot from Carl Schmitt. I think Schmitt has this understanding of liberalism, his critique of the kind of the nature of power within liberalism, which is inherently true. I think it's very obviously true, and I think when you test it out in any modern context, it's very obvious that power in the liberal society is caught up in process, and this basically kind of acts as a kind of a mask for power. And I know in your writings on your Substack, you've done a couple of essays in the last in the last couple of months dealing with touching on the nature of progressives and the progressive use of.
Yes, it's, I suppose, Don, I'm coming from it, I suppose, with a framework in mind. I've developed a kind of, dare I say, a bit of a thesis. It's a bit long winded. And I suppose before I kind of explain what I mean by that, is that, and you and I have discussed this before, is there is a kind of necessity as well for kind of some epistemic kind of humility, because I think when people hear discussions online, there can be a sense of, oh, these lads are just posturing, just kind of full of it. But it's really, really important to understand, or try to understand, what's going on. It's like a doctor. You must first diagnose the problem before you can treat it. And I think that's very, important process to go to. Now, I kind of stumbled across, and I think I mentioned him briefly last week, and I don't want to kind of get too in deep, but a mathematician called Kurt Gödel, and he kind of shows in a, shall I say, a very precise way as a mathematician, that any powerful rule system, and let's be honest, society and civilization is a type of system, has built-in kind of blind spots. So he discovered that all kind of truth propositions cannot be cannot be provable within the axiom or the system itself. Not all truth propositions. Now, what he means by that really is effectively, and to use this analogy, just imagine there's children, and there's a parent, and the parent is in charge of the game, and the children are told, listen, there's treasure in a maze. Now you must find that treasure in the maze. Now, from a meta point of view, the parent acts or acknowledges that the treasure exists. But from the vantage point of the children, they must go in search of the treasure. But according to Gödel, that because of the rules of the game itself, not all truth propositions will be provable, so the children won't be able to find the treasure. Now we know the treasure exists because the parent is outside, is like a meta level. So I kind of took that and I said, okay, if you can apply that obviously to any system, and like what is culture, what are societies, what is civilization, what a type of system. And you've got complexity upon complexity because at its constituent level, you have uh, individuals who are, as we know, are quite complex and complicated or involved in complicated interactions. So I just said, okay, let's kind of look from afar. Now, stop me now if you want to ask any questions, but
Mm.
do you want to, any questions so far, Don? Do you
No,
want
no,
to?
it's very interesting. No, keep going. Keep going.
So I kind of I spoke with a mutual friend of ours and I said, I think it's beneficial to look at this in a kind of holistic manner, right? That if you look at the system as kind of one set, so to speak, and there might be different kind of, interlocking subsets to it or elements within the set that we might think are just unitary, but ultimately they all matter. For example, economics, psychology, spirituality, all those things. So I looked back and I said, okay, if we take a point even before the Reformation, right, you had characters who you would know of, like William of Ockham, of Ockham's razors infamy or fame. But he also was one of the initial proposers of nominalism, that kind of system where he believed that there are no such things as kind of categories. It's just that we use terms to apply to actual individuals' objects, right? Now, bear with me, this sounds really kind of vague, but it'll make sense in a minute. And then you had people like Jan Hus, who was a proto reformist. Then you had the real Reformation, shall I say, and there was kind of rupture between authority, shall I say, spiritual authority, and this ultimately led, what I would argue, in a kind of a linear trajectory towards the Enlightenment, because as soon as central authority was broken down, you had all these different subsets, and of course, the printing press was important for this. Ideas spread, and a lot of the ideas were curated from the top as well. But from the Reformation, you get the Enlightenment, as I said. Again, the folk, and where you get ultimately liberalism emerges as the dominant kind of ideological hegemon within the West, really.
Yeah.
It took a while for conservatism ultimately to lose any traction. But you see, where I'm going with this is that from there, you've got all these intellectual networks in Europe, especially from the Germans, the French, and you end up really with people like Hegel.
Yeah,
And
trying to reintegrate everything into a system because they've destroyed the original kind. Well, that's kind of gone. The original kind of uh, like theological civilization is gone, and he's trying to come up with a theory that encapsulates the Enlightenment with, science and everything else, basically.
exactly, and I'm glad you mentioned science because around the same time you had, of course, the growth of science. So again, um, instantiating, I guess, most of the real world within a kind of a materialistic, worldview, right? That everything can be explained through mechanical processes. And of course, you've got, Darwin. And so there's an acceleration. But like what Hegel kind of did was that he didn't kind of promote the idea of subjectivism, but the role of subjectivity. That ultimately we play a role, we're all integral in history that's unfolding. And from there, I noticed a kind of in the start of the 19th or the 20th century, you'd the growth of phenomenology and Husserl.
Mm.
And Husserl understood that, of course, we mediate the world through our senses, which ultimately means that there's a kind of an ontological aspect, the nature of being, and or no, rather an epistemic understanding of the world, that how do we know knowledge, but we mediate it through our senses, that we don't directly access the outside world, right? And
Yeah.
then a protege of Husserl would have been Heidegger, and Heidegger transformed this into an epistemic kind of quality, where it's about the nature of,
Being.
or an ontological quality, where it's the nature of being itself.
Mm.
Now, they weren't promoting the idea that of kind of this uh, vapid individualism or kind of ego identity that we see today. But this is the kicker. It was distorted by the postmodernists who came afterwards, because they seized upon this idea that, oh, if we mediate the world through our senses, then how reliable can they be? Because we all mediate the world through our individual senses.
Yeah, this is a bit like skepticism again, isn't it? Like where
Exactly.
doubt is cast upon the ability to know objective truth, and so it's just the individual and their own. Is that nominalism basically, where you basically your own individual mind is kind of creating or you know kind of putting together your own reality, like.
Exactly. And all nominalism does, as far as I can understand. I'm not a philosopher, so bear
Well,
with
me
me.
either. No, so
So I could be getting things arseways here, but this is my understanding it, that it imposes a kind of a linguistic sleight of hand, that there are no such things as apples, as just an apple, and that we impose through kind of social construction a category of apples, right? But of
yeah,
course, that has huge implications, because if there are no categories, well, then you might as well get rid of mathematics altogether, because that
yeah,
requires categories. And but the postmodernists were very important. Then you've got the deconstructionists, but at the same time, you've people like Christopher Lash, who was talking about this therapeutic culture that has emerged, because you've
mm,
got a kind of convergence of these different kind of, because from the Enlightenment, of course, you also had Adam Smith and the role of economics, laissez-faireism, and what that produced again is consumerism, and where people are becoming far more and more atomized, right? Far more individualistic. At the same time, then, parallel to this, you've got kind of the Marxists who, after World War One, you had Gramsci, who understood that a purely kind of economic driven, uh, proletariat driven revolt didn't didn't emerge after during World War One. They thought it would. That would be the opportunity.
yeah, and it wasn't in the developed countries either. It was in Russia where eventually
Exactly,
it did happen, which was underdeveloped by
exactly,
economic standards.
and that's why Gramsci said, "Okay, there must be something else that has been the great obstacle," and he discovered that actually it was the cultural pillars that disallowed the proletariat to come together to fight, this great class war. So he figured that in order to get this revolution, we must destabilize the pillars, right? And that includes Christianity, heteronormativity, all these different things that we see happening today. Now, my argument is that people, of course, from outside will say, "Oh, conspiracy theorists and whatever." And as we explained yesterday, or the last time we spoke, is that misunderstands the whole concept of conspiracy, because conspiracies come in different species. And one of the species can be either, there's always an element of central coordination at some level. Now, we don't have to necessarily discuss who's behind it, whatever, just to discuss the trajectory or the model that I'm proposing. It's not to say that they're not there, but I don't need to say it today. But some people, and I use an analogy of a boulder that's directed towards a village that comes apart from the natural setting of the boulder. But there are people who, on the hill, see where the trajectory of the boulder is going, and its natural trajectory is going to miss a village underneath. So they repurpose, shall I say, a portion of the hill and redirect the boulder towards the village, okay, in order to crash into the village. So they're opportunists, and they engage with the environment and they manipulate the environment. And I think that is kind of what's happening at the moment. And on top of it, then you've got the whole economic kind of side to it, which provides, ironically, and you can stop me anytime, Don, because I'm aware I'm talking a lot. But I'll just finish with this, and then I'll like to hear your side. But this can be kind of empirically validated as well, or at least investigated, because there's a neuroscientist out there called Antonio Damasio, and he discovered that when there is kind of some dysregulation or damage to the central medial prefrontal cortex portion of the brain that kind of regulates cognition and feeling, that he discovered actually that people were unable to make some of the most rudimentary decisions. So from that, he was able to articulate and prove that actually we're not rational. Humans aren't rational beings at all. We're feeling beings with the capacity to be rational.
Yeah.
And there's evidence for that, because this is where the economic side comes in. Because if you look at the role of branding since the end of World War One, it's had a monumental effect. For example, there's a guy on YouTube and he deconstructs handbags. Now, you might be saying, Bosco, what are you doing watching videos about a guy deconstructing handbags? But it was a short and it came up in my field, and I thought it was interesting for this reason, right? He'd take a very highbrow haute couture handbag, just say uh, Hermes or whatever, and he'd deconstruct it, he'd take apart, and he'd say, okay, the threading is such a quality, the leather is such a quality, the amount of work that would go involved, maybe a couple of hours stitching or whatever and whatever. And he was saying, okay, I'm an artisan handbag maker. This bag should cost to reproduce about $150 because he's in America. Yet the price tag was for $5,000. So effectively, someone is paying $4,850 for the branding. Okay.
Hmm.
And if you look at advertising, what it really does, it doesn't advertise the benefits of the product, but rather how the consumer feels with the product. And is it over 800 billion a year is spent on advertising and marketing by the way, greedy corporations, right, who would not pay a cent towards anything if it didn't yield a benefit.
Yeah, and
And
it's all non-rational forms of persuasion. None of it is
exactly, and
based
this is
on
where it
like
comes in with the
this product
individualism.
is better or it's not. It's just about how it makes you feel, what kind of
Exactly.
status you can accrue from owning it. You know.
But I'll just finish on this part and then I'll let you in, right? I also discovered that you've got theorists like, what's his name? Pierre Bourdieu, and I think I mentioned him the last day, and what's his name? Philip Reef. And they both discussed how kind of symbolic capital today seems to be very, very kind of important in such a way that kind of people now, it's no longer about kind of, well, there is obviously an overlap between, wealth and the opinions you hold. But he discovered that ultimately, as a society becomes more wealthy and prestige is the currency, well, you obtain prestige by holding certain political thoughts and values. But this is the kicker. How do you test whether those beliefs are real? Well, usually there's a moral or there's a personal cost. For example, a vegan, if a vegan, and you can disagree with veganism all you want, but ultimately, a vegan has a personal cost to their lifestyle. They might be out and there's no vegan meal, so they're going to have to forego or, undermine their own beliefs. So there's a personal cost. But if you look across the West now, most people, especially in the managerial classes, the middle class, and even politics, the media especially, they promote these ideas because it gives them kind of, for a start, their luxury beliefs, like Rob Henderson would say, but also it increases their reputational capital amongst their peers. But there is no personal cost, which means that there is no real moral conviction here. This is all about kind of reputation. And this merges then with the whole thing about, because the dialectic really is true feeling. I've kind of spoken enough there, Don.
Yeah, I mean, are you familiar? I'm sure you. I think you've written about this as well. You're obviously aware of the concept of emotivism.
Yes.
Alice, what's his name? Alistair. Oh, um, what was that guy's name?
McIntyre.
McIntyre. Yeah, yeah, that's the guy. Yeah, yeah, he's dead now actually. But
That's right,
Alistair
yeah.
McIntyre, he did this whole kind of he has this whole thesis called on this concept he called emotivism, basically,
Mm.
and essentially, uh, what he's describing basically is that. Uh, Basically, there's no objective morality, basically, and it's kind of like the people are using moral language, but they're not really describing any kind of coherent moral system, So a lot of that, what you're describing there, I think, is like is related to that, like that the emergence of a society that is um um
It's ultimately
their
kind of like,
attitudes, like their attitudes and values, but they're not really objectively good or bad. But
exactly. I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Don, because if you look across, especially the West, you see it especially in media circles like RTE, BBC, the Irish Times, politics especially. There's this kind of promotion of all these kind of slogans that ultimately are fairly meaningless. As we said the other day about love is love. I mean, what exactly? I mean, that's circular reasoning. What, you can't define something by the term itself, right? So you have to explain, but it resonates because it gains some kind of emotional and reputational cachet in society today. Like if you ask a lot of people why they believe a certain point of view, they'll struggle actually to kind of to build an architecture why they actually believe it.
yeah, yeah, exactly. That is actually, and that speaks to the nature of you went back to you were talking about marketing and Bernays and PR.
That's
Like
right.
PR has had a bigger impact on society, like in the
Mm,
20th century and 21st century, than possibly anything. I mean, look at the situation politically in Ireland. We have a political system ostensibly, which is you've a few parties, and there's a few networks around those parties, but ultimately, like the political situation does not really change, but it would radically change if how those parties were represented through PR was different.
mm,
So if you look at every single mainstream politician is given PR media literacy training basically. There's companies close to the government, they work with corporations, they work with governments. So the government and the corporations are basically the same. They're all institutions basically in the liberal system. And ultimately, like they have officially they have certain capacities, but they're all represented to the public through the methods of public relations management.
that's right.
And so when you look at how people are always making jokes about how they're holding their hands in that, like the Illuminati sign when they're standing, but that's just
Oh,
media training. That's just
that's right.
PR. That's like
That's right.
you have to put your hands somewhere. It's one of the age old problems in public representation, in public imaging, is like I don't know what to do with my hands when I'm taking a photograph. Oh, just put them neatly together, clasp them together. It symbolizes strength. It symbolizes competence. And you have people who have neither of those things, but they're able to project that. And so, the left used to talk a lot about this. It was
Mm,
like some of the original theorists kind of critiquing this were very much kind of left wingers. There was that book called PR. I
mm,
can't remember the guy's name, but that was the basis of a lot of the documentaries made by Adam Curtis.
mm.
That was one of the books that led into him. He made this famous one about Bernays, and they're all great documentaries in their own right. He's a leftist. He has his own kind of spiel that he does, but they're good documentaries. And you see that like the 20th century is basically the century of the self. That's the theme.
That's right.
And what he's getting at there is that you can look at it from a Marxist perspective as well, of course, is that from a classical Marxist perspective, maybe like that a lot of what we're looking at here is basically it's all about uh full the individual kind of selecting certain things as part of their kind of choice. This is what liberalism has kind of devolved into, like when it's kind of realized in its more pure form. is that you get to choose the religion you like, you get to choose what coffee you have, you've loads of options, you can choose, you can develop, that's where we got all this kind of consumerism from in the 20th century, like, is that, you know, like the domain of religion and politics kind of moved with PR and with marketing. It moved from the kind of corporations marketing products, it moved into marketing religions, marketing beliefs, marketing political campaigns, Live Aid, you know, Biafra, all the campaigns, all the charities, and it becomes a kind of a synthetic. It's very hard to work out what's real, because you're just marketed constantly too. Like, and you're speaking in the language of marketing, and even the idea of objective truth, or is what's the power behind this or that. That kind of makes you sound cynical. It's like
Mm.
you're a cynic. But you have to ask the question, like, well, how do we know what's real, really? Like, when you're dealing with that kind of system, where everything is just about marketing.
Mm.
Even the media now is effectively acting as PR for the state.
That's
Like,
right. That's right.
through not, and there's open relationships, but even in this kind of cultural similarity and kind of similar, because they're swimming in the same sea the whole time. The media and the politicians are in a symbiotic relationship. The media needs to produce content, and the politicians need to keep their presence in the public eye. They have to be seen to be doing stuff, and this kind of hides that there is actually a power structure here that's actually behind all of it. There's power being wielded here. The ability to influence the public is power, and but yet it's just a bit of marketing. It's just a bit of media literacy training. But ultimately it comes down to, well, a lot of the decisions that have been made politically are not very popular, but yet nothing changes. And I would say the reason nothing actually changes is because the liberal system is very good at that, taking your energy and you expend it, but you actually don't know how to kind of deal with those things. You can't really deal with the fact that you're dealing with a kind of uh, a decentralized system. There's nodes you're not even aware of. There's relationships you're not even aware of. And because this is what Schmidt kind of was, this is why Carl Schmidt was in favor of, like, conferring authority, as I understand it, onto a kind of a sole sovereign, bit like Hobbes. Then you could say then that, like, that's where the power is. He has the power to decide what the exception, or how the law is going to be applied. But in the liberal system, you're constantly dealing with process. And behind the process, there's all this power. You
Yeah.
go into a courtroom, you think you're going to get a fair trial, but you're actually dealing with power. Do you not have the ability to hire a big barrister? You're in trouble. Do you have the ability to basically get around that system and understand it and navigate it? Probably not, unless you have the proper representation. So this is kind of, I'm going on a bit here about this, but that is the nature of liberal power. Everything is distant, obfuscated, and grey, and you can't really work out how to interface with it.
But there's also kind of a fait accompli, Don, because we're presented right in the West. Like, you'll often hear people will preface anything with democracy or democratic. Whatever follows then must be a social good. Like, it's the deification of democracy, right?
Yeah.
But if you think of what is democracy, people think that they participate in the governance. But the reality is, if you, and Chomsky, who I'm no lover of, but sometimes it's great to use the left's work against themselves. I read his book with Walter. Is it? I think Walter Lippmann came across, or was who coined the phrase "manufacturing consent." But was it Herman, or I can't remember his.
Well, it was Chomsky that kind of made it famous, anyway.
That's right. And Chomsky kind of understood that ultimately you can manufacture by consent, or you can manufacture consent when you prime the audience, you direct the audience, you give the impression of this spectrum of tolerable speech, but it's all pre-planned, it's all constructed. Um, like I said the last time, you can get someone to come on to a TV show, and then you can articulate that, oh well, we're being balanced. We have someone here to represent the other side. But if you choose the the proponent for the other side who might not be as kind of articulate, or may not present well, or who might be a bit gruff. I mean, there's a book out there called what's it called? After the Ball.
Mm,
I think it's
yeah.
called The Gang of America, right? And it's written by two, I think, one psychologist and one marketer.
Yeah, this is the big. I remember John Waters wrote about this book in his "Give Us Back the Bad Roads" book, and that book is hard to find. But yeah, that's an interesting one because that's like, I think at the head the subtitle to that book was something like "How America Will Come to Love
That's right.
Gays" or something like that. You know what I mean? And that's, yeah, speak to it there. Yeah,
And like they articulated, one was a psychologist, the other was an advertiser, right? And that's all you need to know. Because the reality is, going back to Damasio that I said earlier on, people are very susceptible. Not everybody, right? But we know that a decent cohort are. And we know that because of branding sells, advertising sells, right? We see the benefits of it. People are very susceptible to messaging, right? Especially it gives them some kind of reputational currency, especially in a narcissistic world that we have today. Like I argue that today's environment really is kind of um, situated in this kind of narcissistic landscape, and we see it all over the place. And that's why holding certain opinions matters. But going back to Kirk and Madsen, they discovered that, right, you can frame or prime an audience. For example, if you engage screenwriters, and you can have certain homosexual characters in movies, but make them kind of likable.
yeah,
But it's not just making them likable, you must make their antagonist unlikable.
yeah. And an identical game was played with racism as well.
That's right.
The famous one in America was Archie Bunker, and
That's
a
right.
lot of and the power of this was that a lot of Americans kind of liked the character of Archie Bunker because they thought that, oh, he's just saying what he feels, and he's just,
Mm.
he's like an old fashioned guy. But no, actually, they're laughing at you. The writers of the story are laughing at
Right.
you,
That's
and they're
right.
making you the butt of the joke, so that you start to take on these progressive values. And in
That's right.
England, it was a similar. Alf Garnett was
I was going
the
to say that, yeah.
equivalent.
Alf
Yeah,
Garner is exactly the same. And like, it just shows you how malleable the population can be. And I think this is what's kind of really, I suppose, scares me in many respects. We saw it in COVID. We saw it actually in the various referenda. I mean, there were guys coming in. Uh, I saw guys articulating, I use in the broadest sense, their arguments saying that masturbation was another form of abortion, and you're kind of going, do these guys know what fertilization means? I
yeah,
mean, it was just absurd. But now, what I'm going to say here may not be liked by some of the viewers, right? But I'm going to say it anyway. But I think one of the greatest psyops in Ireland, if I can use that again broadly, is the attack on the Catholic Church. Now, I'm a Catholic, so
mm,
obviously I have a vested interest. But I say this because what has happened is kind of how the media were able to equate people, or men in particular, and let's be honest, according to most of the research, homosexual men, as predators upon post-pubescent boys, with the faith itself. So they were able to create this equivalence that they're identical, right?
yeah,
But that doesn't follow at all, because that is a category error between ontology and behavior, right? So, like, people will say, but you could make the same argument about kind of not all jihadists represent Islam, but that's wrong, because their central book, their central tenet, actually promotes that behavior. Whereas in the Bible and catechesis and dogma, doctrines, it actually condemns such behavior, right? So if, for example, a lot of non-Catholics, right, and a lot of Irish people aren't aware that there's a civil war going on in the church, right? And this is going to come back now to Kirk and Madsen, so I'm
yeah, yeah.
hopefully going to
Go ahead.
make sense here. But people think that there's a kind of a monolith of the Catholic Church. There isn't. There's a huge war brewing, and there has been for decades. It's just gotten even more obvious in the last, since Pope Francis, right? You have these kind of modernists who are progressives, essentially, and you've got these traditionalists. And we even see today now, I think over the last couple of days, there's been a lot of research coming out saying that a lot of the agencies involved in the mass immigration scam are Catholic agencies. So again, this assumes that the Catholic Church is behind this. But actually, if you look at the historical record, and even kind of intuitively, especially during the height of Christendom, you had castles, walled towns, walled cities. Nations were part of the faith, right? Nations were part of the subsidiarity. First, subsidiarity is this notion that, kind of localism is good, that your primary duty, it's kind of ordo amoris, right? That your first duty, obviously, it's like on an airplane. You can't, they tell you, don't put the oxygen on yourself or on your baby. You have to put it on yourself first. The reason being is that, well, if you're unconscious, you can't help the baby anyway. So the first order is kind of to yourself, right? Not in an egotistical, narcissistic way, right? And then outwards to your family, your locality, your province, your nation, and then those similar to you, right? Europeans, whatever. And that was always the Catholic principle, right? That's why there were wars waged against the Muslim invaders and all this, right? But sadly, this is where the inculcation comes in and the propaganda and manufacturing consent comes in, is that the media have been exceptionally successful in equating people who acted contrary to the religion with the religion itself. And that was the same type of kind of um, strategy that Kirk and Madsen would have employed. Because what they do is they create these shortcuts, knowing that the audience, right, are no longer sophisticated. It's all about feelings. It's all about this kind of holding the right views and shortcuts. And this is why we are where we are now. Because you'd listen to Irish people there, and I said it last week, you'll hear Irish people say, oh, Ireland is for the world, or, what is even Irish anyway? Yet, in another context, they'll be playing the Wolf Tones, wearing their Celtic jersey, right? I mean, that does not make sense. So there has to be another reason, because it's not rational at all. This is about emotion, as you said earlier on, Don.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very obvious to me. Sorry, you can go back in a second, but like, it's very obvious to me that what's gone on in Ireland, like, is a psychological operation, if ever there was one.
Mm.
In that they've been able to basically take the consequences of liberalism in the church, which is, i.e., letting like gay men basically become priests, which they
Mm.
shouldn't be,
That's
and
right.
basically then when they act on that impulse, mainly with teenagers, um, you turn around and blame the church. But actually, it's liberalism.
Well, exactly, and I suppose the point is, and people say, "Oh, you're providing some kind of no true Scotsman fallacy," but the no true Scotsman fallacy really is about effectively saying that necessary conditions and changing the or altering the goalposts. But actually, when it comes to Catholicism, if someone acts contrary to the faith, that is not a no true Scotsman. That is actually reinforcing the reality of necessary conditions. For example, you're not if someone said, "Oh, they eat meat every day" and call themselves a vegan, well, obviously they can't call themselves a vegan because it's contrary to the very ethic that they label themselves. So there's a kind of cognitive dissonance. They either change the definition or change the behavior. But like we're seeing today, such like I'll never forget the day that I turned on the news or it came on my feed. Some Irish politicians, I think a couple of old biddies on in the Senate or whatever, talking about white privilege. Done. Bear in mind, right? Irish people have for so long, even internationally, been treated like dogs, literally, or worse than dogs, right? In some cases, we were probably the only white people who were used. Well, that's not necessarily true. The word slave comes from Slav, but as indentured servants during the Cromwellian campaign. We effectively, the famine was an orchestrated genocide. Um, our language is completely taken away from us, really. We were deforested. Now, I'm not necessarily blaming every Brit for that because I think that's another canard. Because most British people, according to the BBC, even last week, said that 99% of British for 99% of the time lived in abject poverty, yet they'll still call them white privileged. Because the reality is the elites, the very wealthy, prospered, right?
Of course, yeah.
And like, I just think that we're living in such an incoherent time. And the reason it's successful is people no longer have the ability to critically think.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
one tiny little historical analysis of Ireland would say, white privilege? Are you joking? Sorry, go on, Don.
yeah, and that speaks to like what you're saying there is it's a great encapsulation because what you're talking about there basically is how essentially elites have been able to benefit from basically passing on the decisions that were taken in an older time and then basically democratizing them to say,
Mm,
well, that represented all of the Irish people.
that's right.
Ireland benefit, and it's the same thing that they do actually, in fairness, with the colonial countries. Like they blame all the British people
That's right.
benefited from colonialism. Well, they didn't. They fucking well
Exactly.
didn't. Like,
All you have to do,
well,
if anyone's a fan of Charles Dickens, that's simply just not true, because the
yeah,
workhouses, whatever, were documented. I mean, another myth is that universal suffrage. Actually, suffrage was only allowed to men who were propertied, and I think men as a category only had the vote universally 10 years before female suffrage in Britain. So again,
yeah.
all these myths come up as if there was a farmer in Ireland in 1423 and he had the vote while his wife didn't. It's absolute garbage.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to like I believe you see a lot of the reasons for these kinds of narratives. If you look at what happened to the left wing essentially after the war,
Mm,
a lot of people on the left actually believe that and I think there's a lot of evidence for it, that the left, which is supposedly going to represent the poor people, working people, basic socialism and things like that, like that they were specifically targeted with this kind of identity left or kind of what would you call it, like a pseudo left. And essentially, that a lot of these narratives that you get about Western villainy in the post-war era,
mm,
you have this kind of conglomerate of like decolonization,
mm.
postmodern stuff starting to happen, and as what's going on is that a lot of these countries that are decolonizing, like India or South Africa or any of these um, later on, of course, but ended up apartheid. But like all of those African countries that got independence, they're being given this kind of narrative that, well, the West colonized us, and,
Mm.
well, like, who colonized? I mean, you're talking about a tiny elite basically, and that elite is then able to turn around and say, well, we're all guilty of this, so now we have to open our borders.
That's
We
right.
have to start basically sustainable, or well, originally it was development. It started off as economic development, and
Mm.
it was done through institutions of the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, etc. And then later on, in the globalization era, we get mass immigration. But the point stands is that what this really represents is that there is an economic power behind liberalism which benefited greatly from colonialism and now benefits greatly while blaming the indigenous people of Europe for
That's right.
colonialism and then planting their countries in a very much similar process. Because if you look at how America was founded, I mean, before there was an American Constitution, before the actual founding of the political institutions, you had these colonies, and essentially there were plantations. There were sugar plantations, tobacco plantations, places like Virginia and everything. And so a lot of that, all of that stuff developed out of economics.
That's
And of
right.
course, the Marxists are critical of that, understandably. But a lot of this, like blaming regular people for these kinds of things, or holding our countries today
Mm.
responsible for that, like that's incredibly subversive, in my opinion.
Unbelievably so. I mean, to be honest, like the whole thing about slavery itself is a distortion because we know from a historical fact that for a start, the it was Western Europe that actually fought against slavery ultimately, but also the fact that Africans themselves were involved in the slave trade themselves.
Yeah, well, slavery has
And
existed for the entirety of human time.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And sadly, this is all part of this anti Western, anti white, anti Christian um, crusade, dare I use the term, or not crusade, but assault, because I think it's to demoralize, if I'm being honest. And you see, the problem is you've got people now holding bizarre beliefs about themselves, and oikophobia, as Roger Scruton would call it. And a lot of that is because ultimately people have been hollowed out from the middle where there's no real substance anymore. It's all very superficial. It's about, oh, look at these are the views that I hold. Aren't I cool or aren't I prestigious, or as I call them, aren't I part of the sophistico class? Right?
Yeah.
And this really is what ultimately consumerism has done as well, because it's like keeping up with the Joneses. I must get my new car. Oh, who cares about something like nation or faith or anything like that? But sure, I have a holiday home in Tenerife. It doesn't matter. But the thing is, Don, and I said it the last time, is that the assumption is by a lot of these people is that prosperity will continue. That is
Mm.
not actually a historical reality at all. For the vast majority of human existence, the vast majority of humans lived in poverty. And that's why I believe, in tandem with the growth in technology and surveillance, that we're probably heading towards a neo feudalism, if I'm being honest.
And do you see people like, Musk and Thiel as kind of do being one branch of that, the technocratic kind of side of it? Is that how you kind of view it?
This is where, like, I mean, this is part of the Godelian kind of logic that I approach from. I don't know for certain because I only have access to information that most people have access to. But my rule of thumb is this: I think anybody who gets to that level of wealth or gets to any level of power, it suggests something about them. You have to be I mean, I've heard of people even climbing ladders in corporations, even small corporations, and they can be fairly vicious. Like,
Hmm.
so, imagine being the richest man in the world, or being very high up in politics. And that's the problem with politics in a way, because what it does really, and I never kind of got round to the whole thing about democracy being a fait accompli, because I think most of ideas are astroturfed and we give back to the government what they had prearranged or preordained in the first place. So it's an illusion of democracy. It's an illusion of participation. But like ultimately, I think most anyone who enters politics or stays there or is successful there, ironically, is unsuitable for politics. Yet they're the only people who will be successful. So there's a kind of a
Yeah.
paradox going on.
I'll tell you something I noticed. I don't know if you saw the Epstein Steve Bannon interview that came out there today or yesterday,
No.
but I watched it there. I had it on in the background as I was getting ready to come on here tonight, like, and at one point, Bannon asks Epstein, and you have to consider Epstein is running this big operation for years, basically, which is an influence slash probably
Yeah.
blackmail type situation.
Yeah.
And Bannon asks him basically about his about meeting all these famous politicians and what they're kind of, oh, was it exciting or whatever? I can't remember exactly, but what was it like meeting these must have been interesting people. And Epstein basically says no, they weren't interesting at all. They're just good at doing the political thing of getting elected.
Mm.
So you're not really dealing with like intellectuals or thinkers or people with really particularly interesting things to say. And I think you can see that very much with the kind of tech bro kind
Mm.
of thing as well. Like there's different groups, obviously, but like essentially, if you think about the Peter Thiel, they're types, they're kind of, and Elon Musk, they're kind of more libertarian minded. Um, and then you have more technocratic types who are a little bit more progressive, and they're probably a larger group within the kind of what's controlling the technology industry, broadly speaking. Thiel and Musk are a little bit more like outsiders. They're a bit more like what the traditional kind of early internet people were kind of about, which is very libertarian, very open source kind of thing. But and utopian as well. There's a utopian side to them. But
Have you
you know,
ever kind of listened into
but,
my?
oh, sorry, but
Sorry, go
their
on.
ideas on politics just are very kind of silly sometimes.
Yeah.
Like the actual, if you listen to, like, Thiel is probably better than Musk in terms of he has a more fleshed out kind of ideology of such as
Mm,
sorts, but Musk kind of says things which you're kind of going like, gee, this is actually, this guy doesn't know very much about politics or history or anything,
mm.
you know. And I find the same when I, even when I listen to certain like progressive philosophers or whatever, like Harari from the World Economic Forum.
I
He's the house
You just
philosopher.
beat me to it. I was just about
Yeah,
to say, yeah.
yeah, but exactly. But isn't he like, he's incredibly banal? Like he like he kind
Well,
of
he's not
takes,
not even banal though, Don. I find him frightening. The way he
yeah.
talks
That's the
about
scary
people as
about it. Yeah,
use, yeah, I mean, he's quite a frightening bloke. I mean, have you read anything by Hannah Arendt and her, it's a totalitarianism and Eichmann in Jerusalem?
yeah. I haven't
And
read that, but I'm aware of her. I've read a
yeah,
good bit about her. Like, yeah.
and it's an interesting look at how, the banality of evil and
But
how.
she's a raving Zionist as well, though. You know what I mean? So she at the same time she's writing that, she's justifying what they're doing in Palestine.
Oh, without doubt, and
No,
that's the incoherence of it all. I
yeah.
mean, in fact, I put up an article there about human rights because I think the whole human rights industry has completely been subverted. Human rights, as its provenance is inherence, and I think I explained that the other day, that inherence is about that. It comes from the word inherent or intrinsic. That it's ultimately a Christian ideal. We're all formed in the likeness of God, imago Dei, right? That we all have inherent value. But as
Yeah.
once you start adding contingencies or conditionalities, for example, you're only human if, right? You're sentient or you're this. They're all arbitrary constructs. You've
Or
already
you're
moved
not
away
racist.
from what human rights was. But you're like what you were saying about Hannah Arendt. You've got Amnesty International promoting abortion, which is completely has removed itself from inherence to conditionality,
Yeah.
yet it'll still consider itself a human rights organization.
Yeah.
Like it is. This brings us back actually neatly to when you were just talking about power, and I think I mentioned it last week or the other a couple of weeks ago whenever we were on about another leftist who I'll steal his great research and insight is Stephen Luke's. And he speaks of power with three phases. The first is kind of decision making, the second phase is agenda setting. But he said the most insidious form is the third phase. And that is where we accept things without even inquiring into whether uh, it's true or not. For example, uh, a lot of the mass immigration operates at the third phase of power because people no longer feel they're able to discuss whether they've any interest in the matter at all. They're actually programmed to say, no, this is a good in of itself. They have
Mm.
accepted the conclusion without any premises being outlined, and that is exceptionally dangerous. And we're heading down that road. And of course, that can only succeed when when a population is narcissistic and thrives on reputational or symbolic capital.
Yeah.
Because remember, these people don't have any real convictions. And this is where it ties in as well with the likes of Graham Lenihan. And listen, okay, the guy suffered badly, but it wasn't that long ago that Graham Lenihan would have been calling you and I Nazis and fascists.
I know, and he did actually deliberately. He actually, sorry, deliberately. He actually did attempt to get that your man Count Dankula in a lot of trouble when he
That's
made
right.
that obviously comedic video. And
Exactly.
honestly, even if it wasn't a comedic video, he's fucking well entitled to make it. You know,
Exactly.
like
Exactly.
that.
And the problem,
I thought we were supposed to be liberal.
well, you see, it's there's a kind of as an Orwellian thing going on. Well, some people, we tolerate some people, but not others. But under the banner of tolerance, I mean, it's a Marcusian kind of phenomenon. But like this is the incoherency of modernity, and that's what makes it very dangerous because there is no coherency. It's incoherent, and because everything revolves around feeling. For example, like the transgender debate, that is absolutely garbage because they'll say that personal identity, a narrative, is all that's required, but then they'll demand to dress. in conformity with external expressions of femininity, especially men. So you're kind of going, well, if all it takes is, you know, an internal ideological commitment, well, why do you then require external validation? I mean, it's completely garbage on any kind of logical level. But remember, we're not living in logical times.
Yeah,
You've ultra celebrities there calling about ICE, right? Which is comical because they're living in gated communities.
yeah. Yeah, and honestly, who cares about their opinions anyway? I mean,
Exactly,
like this is the
exactly.
frightening thing is that celebrities are even listened to on things like politics.
That's right.
You know, rarely does a celebrity or an entertainer of any kind, especially actors and musicians. I mean, they tend to have literally no conception of anything. This is one of the reasons I deliberately avoid these kinds of things. Like,
Well,
you know, they're
funny you should say
not going to
that.
learn anything. You know.
Anthony Hopkins has come out and said, listen, I don't get involved in politics because he said, I just pretend for a living. I'm an actor. I am not expert in anything other than acting.
Yeah, shut up and act.
And what's his name said, Billy Bob Thornton kind of said something along the same lines on an interview with, what's his name, Rogan. And okay, these guys might actually hold contrary opinions. We don't know because they don't discuss them. But at least they're honest enough to say, listen, I'm just a bloody actor. Being an actor gives me no more expertise than Mary Murphy down the road, who's 72 and has never read a book in her life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that speaks to the way that the kind of post-war kind of political situation is so much about feelings and narcissism, as you're writing about in several articles about narcissism and about how a lot of this is like even charity has
That's right.
descended into this
Money, money.
philanthropy has descended into this egotistical crusade, basically not even crusade, an egotistical campaign of self promotion. And honestly, given the day that's in it, like I just think of Bono and all, but the
Oh, yeah.
and Geldof and these guys, and then you look at like, well, there's a lot of power behind that, and certain people have come up in these new documents allegedly. I don't know, but it makes you kind of it makes you pretty cynical about honestly, like I'm very cynical about charity overall now, you know,
Oh, totally
um,
agreed.
and to the
I
to the
mean, I
extent
think
that
they've
I'd
lost.
probably recommend people not to use it, you know.
Well, coming up to Christmas, I told kind of, or I gave my opinion on our Saints and Scholars channel to say, listen, there's people you know personally who are in need. Help out a friend
Yeah,
because you
yeah,
know that's going to whatever, and you can do it anonymously or whatever. But I said, if you're giving money, like Trócaire, I was in Cork a couple of years ago and there was a protest and I went to one, a nationalist protest. And across from us, with all the lefties and communists, were Trócaire. I'll never forget it.
yeah,
And I
yeah. They're,
wrote off
they're
to
an organization actually.
and I wrote off to them and I said, I will never ever. I said when we were kids, we were collecting money for Trócaire or whatever. I said, I will never give you a cent ever again. Because I said, you've got people there who, if they had their opportunity, if they had their dystopian kind of utopia, I know that sounds like a contradiction, but it kind of fits their worldview. But if they had that kind of hellscape, well, people like in Troker would be the first to be kind of, you know, um, shall I say, what's a euphemism I'm trying to look for? But I think you know where I'm going at,
Yeah,
or
gotten rid of, dealt with.
dealt with exactly.
Yeah,
But like it's laughable, and I think the same with kind of the Catholic hierarchy. They are probably one of the worst in the world. I would argue.
yeah,
They have absolutely no sense of they have no sense of reality. They have no tethering to any reality. It's all about they've become actually kind of Sadducees of the kind of secularism. Because all they do is rabbit the exact same terms, right, that the progressives and the secularists put out. And the irony here is done, no matter what they say, they'll still be hated. That's the irony.
yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's actually tragic, like because you actually what
It's
they do is
pathetic.
they throw
Tragic,
away the
pathetic.
thing that would have given them authenticity
Yeah.
and respect. You can say what you want about them, but they stick to their principles. Whereas if you keep backsliding, no one respects you because you're not actually standing for anything. You're just trying to like curry favor with
That's
like
right.
with your enemies, basically.
Like there was a priest there in Kerry, Father Sheehy. We ended up interviewing him on our channel. Lovely fella, old school, and he had the audacity to promote or Orthodox Catholic social teaching in a church, and of course, one or two cafeteria Catholics obviously got upset. Then, of course, they, I suppose, almost nearly touted uh, or informed upon Father Sheehy to the mass media, and of course, they love any opportunity to attack. Oh, they love any opportunity to attack the church, and of course, especially if the attack is adjacent to any of their ideological totems. And what did Father Sheehy's superior do? The Bishop of Kerry, he sided with the secular media. He chastised
Well,
openly an old retired priest who was promoting the Catholic faith.
yeah,
And you're kind of going, these guys, just unbelievable stuff. And
yeah,
I suppose as well, and before, you know, I let you back in, or not me letting you back in, but coming in yourself, but is I think there's an assumption sometimes that if you're a Catholic in Ireland, like myself and Creda and Marcus, who run Saints and Scholars, that we're kind of obsequious types. But we're not. We'd be the biggest, I'd say, kind of criticizers of the Catholic hierarchy and some of the
yeah,
clergy they can get, because they have let down the Irish people. Like, but again, that does not mean that the faith is wrong. It just that means that same with politics. Do we throw politics out, or do we say that there's some bad politicians and treacherous politicians?
yeah.
Do you know? I mean, that's the conundrum.
Yeah, I'll come back in there in a moment. I actually just want to announce that if anyone has any comments, you can drop them in the various on the various forums and the various platforms that we're on, and you can we will get to them as well. I see a few people commenting on YouTube. Odyssey is down. I don't know why that is, but I haven't got the means to fix that right now. So I'll have to leave Odyssey for now. I'll upload it there afterwards. But yeah, no, what you speak to there is interesting. I mean, one of the things that's topical, of course, this week is this whole Bridget thing, and I think this is actually a good example of
Mm,
power in action,
mm,
because my take on what this really represents is that this is essentially a kind of a marketing and branding exercise
that's
led
right.
by the Department of Foreign Affairs.
That's right.
And ultimately, what it means is that it's giving Ireland a kind of a new metaphysical center. Now, the reason I believe that they're particularly focusing on female goddesses is because since the 60s, really, there's been this resurgence in a lot of this kind of crackpot feminist literature
That's
of this
right.
notion of goddesses being, benevolent and good and inherently good, and of course masculine is bad.
That's
But of
right.
course, if you're looking at this from a power perspective, you would want to basically create this kind of feminine kind of archetype for an Irishman, because it means you're placid, and it means you
That's right.
basically will not defend yourself, because they're not making Cú Chulainn a thing. They're making Bridget a thing because they want to market her as an abortionist, which is not even true anyway. But
That's right. Yeah.
regardless, insane pseudo history garbage. But like what this really represents to me is this is power. You're looking at power there. The campaign is created, it's marketed, it's built up over years, and then academics are used to construct a pseudo history. And if you say, well, this is clearly nonsense, well, you haven't got a PhD,
Mm,
you're not a doctor in the university. And ultimately, what this is, it's creating a kind of a new identity for Irish people, basically, in which they can basically become feminine, uh, embrace basically what are basically Western progressive values, i.e., Anglo-American liberal progressive values. You LGBT rights, abortion, etc. This is the new culture. This is the culture, and we've mapped it to your old culture. So you're basically legitimizing the current dispensation.
yeah. I mean, I think ultimately we're in a situation where I kind of propaganda works, but even more insidiously. And I'm kind of going off on a limb here, so bear with me. And it's pure speculative, but I was only thinking the other day. I was thinking of Sinn Féin, right, especially up the north. And you had Sinn Féin, you had, of course, Arthur Griffith, the, you know, the founder, and they've removed themselves so much from that founding chapter, shall I say, that they are actually acting antithetical to its original purposes. And Sinn Féin would have been kind of to promote the Irish Catholic community, including culture, values, attitudes, and beliefs. And I was only thinking, or I think I could have picked it up on a podcast somewhere, and I thought it made a lot of sense, is that I think they could have been actually even talking about Zionism and Hamas. But
Yeah.
I still use the concept. I think it's important that the best way to destroy a movement is not to attack the people, but the idea itself that propels the movement. So, like, I think some Zionists were saying, "Oh, we don't, you're never going to attack Hamas. What you do is you attack the idea that Hamas are fighting for." And I think they've done the same to Sinn Féin,
Mm.
because if you look at Sinn Féin, right, they promote everything that's anti-Catholic, anti-Irish, right, and all of their, or the vast majority of their followers do the same. Now you have to ask yourself, how can you go from um, enduring persecution, murdering, gerrymandering, the whole gamut, right? And then throw all that away and actually accelerate the demise of the very thing that you're defending.
Yeah.
Like, I think these people, I think behind the scenes, you see, again, speculative, that if you look at countries, they're no longer going to be countries, they're going to be franchises. And if you look at the American baseball or football, they're the best kind of analogy, really. Because I remember, was it the New York Dodgers, I think, and then they were moved to, was it California? And for us in in Ireland and Britain, we I think the only time it's kind of similar is when the Dons, pardon the pun,
Mhm.
what you call Wimbledon moved from to Milton Keynes, right? And a lot of people thought, well, how can you just apply a name that is so kind of synonymous with a location and just use it as a franchise, because it was alien to a lot of people who liked football and stuff, right? It's like, in a way, saying kind of, Kerry now is actually is Dublin because it's a franchise. We've just moved the franchise. It sounds it's just kind of incomprehensible to us, right? But I think that's what they're trying to do for the world, that we're all these little units of commerce. And ultimately, it's to make the uber wealthy even more wealthy. But remember, wealth isn't a means to an end. Wealth for its own sake, if it didn't obtain control, it would be quite worthless. Like, if you had all the gold in the world, but it didn't yield you any influence, what kind of what would be the intrinsic value of it, really? It's because it offers you, because of scarcity, control. And I think if you listen to the likes of Yuval Noah Harari and these characters, and they kind of let it slip when they talk about useful or useless eaters, uh, you know, and all these different type of dehumanizing categories. I mean, they've already achieved, when you think of it, with abortion, because they were able to move from inherence to condition. And
Yeah.
you can, if abortion now is contingent, well then uh, you can substitute one variable for another. For example, 1 year it might be sentience, but who's to say that in a couple of years it'll be about political opinion? And we saw that actually during COVID, because people were dehumanized during COVID on the basis of having a jab or not.
Yeah, and look, I mean, they've been dehumanized under many and other homophobe. You're a homophobe.
That's right.
You're a racist. You're a bigot. All these terms, like these are all a lot of these terms are basically didn't exist 20 years. Some of them didn't exist 30 years ago. Uh, the concept of racism or whatever. This is a very recent thing. And if you look at what's behind that, I'm going to be publishing an article. I keep saying this every 2 weeks, but I am finishing it. It's just it's taken a bit long with the research to finish up it. But basically, if you look at the development of contemporary anti-racism, this is inherently an elite project, and it's linked inherently to power structures. If you look at the people who a lot of it comes out of legal theory, a lot of it comes out of elites constructing the law, using the law to move, as you say, from a natural law kind of position to this kind of progressive positivist type of the law, where it just continually looks to satiate particular human rights for particular categories of people and
Mm,
removes them from others.
that's right.
And I mean, the concept of homophobia, like you go back to that After the Ball book. I mean, that only emerges. That book came out in the early '90s, I think it was it? I think
That's
believe.
right. Yeah, it's quite recent historically. Yeah,
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 and then you had Will and Grace and and people were just conditioned to kind
that's
of
right.
view things this way, you know.
I mean,
And
there was a movie there about two. I think we mentioned the last day about two. I think it was Matt Damon and I can't remember the other actor. And oh no, that was a different film. Anyway, there were these two actors and they got married. I pronounced you Chuck and Chuck or something like that. And the premise was kind of the two men got married. It was so ridiculous. Yet, literally within a decade, if you challenge that, you'd be seen as some kind of homophobe. It's
yeah,
remarkable, and that's why Neil Ferguson, I said the last day, his remarks that social change is happening rapidly and exponentially because of uh, the internet.
yeah,
That social norms are changing rapidly, and of course, it's compounded by the fact that if you live in a narcissistic world where reputation is key, well then it converges. And like, I don't know, did you ever hear of kind of this Scottish Sentencing Council guideline? It emerged there a couple of years ago, and uh, effectively it's mitigation of sentencing or of sentences, criminal sentences in Scotland on the basis. Now it's not mandatory, but it's open to judges to reduce sentencing on the basis that you're under, I think, is it under 25? On the basis of scientific research saying that the brain still ultimately develops well into your 20s, that impulse control and things like that. Yet, a lot of the left are also in favor of reducing the franchise age to 16, especially
yeah,
in woke places like Scotland, the S&P. So you've got an acknowledgement that, in criminal sentencing, that up to the age of 25, because of natural impulse dysregulation, shall I say, they say, well, we'll mitigate sentences because they can't help making bad decisions. But at the same time, they want to reduce the voting age to 16. And the reason for that, Don, as we've earlier discussed earlier, is that when you're 16, you're far more impressionable. I mean, people are impressionable at 25 because of impulse control. They're doing the same with the mass immigration. And like, there are even Catholics out there who I can't understand for the life of me. And I'm trying to say to them, they'll go, sure, I think David Quinn put this argument forward. Sure, I prefer an Ireland of 1 million Indian Catholics than none. And I'm going, that is so ludicrous
yeah,
on many levels. Because does he honestly, in a way, it's kind of, and I'm not accusing him of racism, but it is a kind of a subtle form of angelicization, because what it's really saying is that Indians must be immune from the propaganda that we all went through.
yeah.
It's that.
Yeah, I mean, I find the Iona Institute kind of a curious thing. Like, I mean, I'm not really. I mean, he says some reasonable things and all that, but like, um, I
That's
don't know
just
what's going on
madness.
with that. Yeah,
And it's the same with the kind of the articulation there by some people. Oh, I'm 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 anti I'm anti-immigration that isn't legal, but if it's legal, I'm okay. But
yeah.
sure,
You see,
it
that
only
speaks
takes
to
one broad
naivety
stroke of a
of power.
penny to
Yeah,
render illegal to legal. You'll still destroy the country.
Yeah, I mean, in my analysis of like, I've been looking at immigration as an issue for like a decade at this point, and like with all the research I've done, like what is obviously apparent to me, it just jumps out at you like when you look at this, is that none of this stuff was ever popular.
Yeah.
So the idea that this speaks to how I would say kind of nationalists and conservatives and different and people in that kind of wheelhouse, they tend to have a very uh, non-fleshed out kind of idea or inaccurate picture of how power actually operates.
Mm.
And so they there's a constant myth purported basically that this all happened because people just became liberal and for no reason at all one day whatsoever we just decided to become liberal and that we're better and we're enlightened and all this. I was like, no, this is just social engineering. This
Mm.
is long-term social engineering by
Mm.
elites. Elites manufacture the will of the public, and that because the public have never wanted mass immigration, for example,
That's
they've
right.
never wanted it, and people think that it speaks to the kind of naivety that if we protest, then people will listen to us, and something will happen.
That's right.
Something will happen, and it'll change. And of course, it hasn't happened yet. The only thing that happens is that the liberal system morphs and like a like a like antibodies go into a virus. It
Mm.
basically takes the form that it needs to take to neutralize the attack.
That's
So
right.
you saw that like after the election of Trump and Brexit and all that, and the rise of kind of more kind of right wing populism or kind of conservative type populism, whatever you want to call it. Uh, they kind of restructured a little bit and set up all these institutions to basically watch nationalists and to watch what people like us were doing and to basically conflate being a nationalist with being a terrorist
That's right.
or being someone who's dangerous, someone who shouldn't have any opinion. Apparently, there's a big network. Apparently, if you have a Twitter account, you're part of a network now, and
That's right.
and all these institutions they flowed straight out of Washington and London, and that's not a surprise because that's where the power is.
Mm.
And nationalists often take it that, well, I have to convince a certain number of people who want to change things. People already want to change things.
Mm.
People already want to change. Now, to what extent they're willing to sacrifice to do it, that's the question. But people are not happy with the current situation, that's for sure. But
But
nationalists often don't kind of know or don't kind of have that kind of sense to kind of say, well, okay, I don't have to protest. I have to actually come up with ways of stopping this elite like that's doing this, and we have to construct our own elite, which has our values and which will defend those things doggedly.
but sure, if you look at the Brussels elitists, uh, the likes of Ursula von der Leyen, I mean, these people will appeal to democracy vis-a-vis some dictator across the world and say how bad they are. And you'll get newspapers lapping this up, and you're kind of going, do these people have any sense of self reflection at all? And it confirms, in a way, my thesis because I think we make the mistake that the other side are rational. They're not. They're not rational. And I think Antonio Damasio demonstrated we are, by and large, a species that feels with the capacity for reason, but reason now is being kind of bypassed. And that's why where we are. That's why you've got people there. It's like turkeys voting for Christmas. They don't seem to have the capacity to recognize anything that is critical. And like, or not that anything is critical, but anything that is kind of requires critical thinking. And I think, do we, to move, and I know people go, well, there you are, and about you're whinging, because I hear that a lot. Oh, you're whinging. I'm not whinging. I'm trying to understand what's going on. And they'll say, do you have any solutions? Now, there are some solutions. Like, for example, I think you can try and take back the language subtly. And that's why I think it's important that people, instead of people saying migrants, they should say self interested migrants, because it's a truth claim. Everybody says, I'm self interested. Irish people are self interested. Nationalists are self interested. But so are migrants and so are leftists. So you're not stating something that isn't true. But what it confirms is that migrants are not neutral actors. Like, for example, there were wars all the time. You mentioned Biafra earlier on. You had Vietnam. There were always wars, right? across the globe. Why is it that we didn't get this kind of movement of people when we were poor?
Yeah.
It's obvious. The reason now there's a global issue here as well, but I'm just saying it converges with the fact that we're now a profitable destination for people.
Yeah, and structures have been constructed by the power system, basically, that is in liberalism, that is kind of obfuscated. And because it's all complicated, and it's, there's all these, like the IOM or the EU's got structures and institutions in place. We've got agreements we've made. We've got non-committal but yet ratified kind of agreements that have been signed up by the state. You've got, like, it works the whole way top down. You have the P of people collecting people, directing them into Europe. All this stuff didn't exist before, and the pull factor is there now. Consistently, they'll deny that the pull factor exists, and they'll say, "Oh, that's just nonsense." And of course, no, people are being unsettled by climate change, and I mean, this is laughable. I mean, if you just stop taking people in, people won't come. It's that simple. People
There's
are
a,
not going to undertake a 1,000-mile journey if
exactly.
they know that they're not going to be given citizenship. You know,
There's also an added thing that I don't hear anybody talking about, and that is the costs for migrants themselves. And I've made this point in an essay ages ago that I said, and I don't hear anybody actually talking about it. And I said, and all it requires is a small bit of research, that human trafficking obviously benefits these criminal gangs or entities because obviously there's a payment required, and it's not minimal. Like it's talk between a couple of grand and upwards. Like there was a Chinese woman who had 20 grand in her pocket. I think she, God love us, she died in a container somewhere, right? The brute reality, and I've been to Africa, the brute reality, right, is that the people who can afford to pay the traffickers are actually the middle classes in
yeah.
these countries, right? And here's the kicker, right? This is the irony for the leftists, is that there are billions in remittances from these from this diaspora back to those countries that accentuate the disparity between the rich and the poor. So you're
Mm,
actually making the poorer in those countries poorer, right?
mm.
And the left are involved in that kind of form of stratification.
Yeah, I mean, and the left are operating in a system created really by large international
That's
institutions,
right.
and that's like I call them the broom of liberal capital, because that's what they basically are. Like like the left that existed really since the 60s and 70s is essentially a middle class,
Correct.
status based institution. It's
Exactly.
kind of post Marxist, actually. It's not even
That's right.
Marxist for the most part. I mean, see, you can proclaim yourself to be, a Marxist or whatever, or you can say I'm interested in this theory or that theory, but that just means you're sublimating. Certain ideas are sublimated into
And
your
there's no
ideas.
personal cost, though, Don. That's the
No, no
thing.
personal cost, and they're not, and they don't represent an act. Like, they're trying. Some of them are trying to construct a kind of a proletariat out of all of this. So the more radical ones you will see are using a lot of Marxist kind of language, and so they're very intent on creating this kind of conflict. They're trying to create an artificial proletariat because one doesn't really exist as anymore in the West, and essentially then so they're trying to turn these groups into a proletariat and to direct them, and then you have the liberals who don't really want that, but are kind of more motivated by the idea of, like, their status within this system,
Mm,
and they think they're going to fix these great global problems, which is kind of the ethos of Davos, man, is that problems are only important if they're global. And
mm.
so, as part, I did a tweet on Davos, man, there a week ago, like, and it was, basically, I talked about Peter Sutherland, and basically he's part of a class, so with the development of capitalism and the development of liberalism over time, you get different classes emerge. In the 17th century, you had the beginning of a kind of administrative class in Britain, and you move through history, and you get it in Germany when once unification happens, you get this administrative class, which is very much close to the state and administering the state, the bureaucrats, and they're necessary to an extent, but since the 60s, I would say, in the West, you have this new kind of class has emerged based on lifestyle choices, choosing your own smorgasbord of spirituality,
That's
bit
right.
of yoga, bit of Hinduism, bit of Tai Chi, little bit of liberal Christianity, whatever it is. And you can just pull it all together and make your own kind of like buffet of religion and belief. And so a lot of what we're dealing with here is just a result of artificial, like you say, wealth and prosperity, which is kind of fleeting. And so people have time for this kind of thing, and support for immigration and these social causes has gone hand in hand with that. So there is a class.
Mm.
When I've done a good bit of reading on the emergence of like the kind of Irish NGO kind of structure, like, and the earliest versions of it are are some of the missionaries, of course, are part of it early on, and they're still there, of course, but like they're kind of they're sublimated into the whole kind of
Liberation
thing now,
College. Yeah.
and they've been kind of liberalized. They're
Mm.
more liberal, and some of them were into liberation theology, of course, as well early on. But like the what we're talking about is this structure that exists, like, and it's this class of people become. So in the 60s, the UN goes on this big development crusade, and
Mm.
it's like the 60s is going to be the decade of development. Now, the people who came up with that were basically all progressive economists in places like Harvard.
Mm.
And after 20 or so years of that, 20 or 30 years of that, we poured a lot of aid. You had the creation of Irish Aid and all these different governmental aid agencies. They're
Mm.
all affiliated with their, NGO networks. In
Mm.
Ireland, we got Concern, Goal,
Mm.
Trócaire, and all this, Amnesty, and much later ones then. But that basically kind of Ireland's whole identity. Once we joined the EU, and before that the EEC and the OECD, a whole diplomatic identity was constructed for Ireland based on we are now part of this liberal international kind of structure, and a
Mm.
whole class of person. I would include Mary Robinson in this.
Oh yeah.
That's a perfect encapsulation of it. So her career basically goes from being a liberal, an Irish liberal, basically going to Trinity. She gets like a scholarship to go to Harvard University, where she stays for a year or two doing her, I think it was master's, I can't remember exactly, but basically she comes out as a human rights lawyer,
Mm.
and she is radicalized at Harvard. Now she's at Harvard at the end of the civil rights. I think she's actually at Harvard specifically during the summer of '68,
Mm.
which is the great uh,
Sense on wheat. Yeah.
student neo-Marxian Marcuse inspired um, protest era, where they're all, there's whole like arguments that they were basically the American state was actually using these students against de Gaulle, for
Mm.
example,
Yeah.
in Paris. I think that's probably the case, personally.
Probably. Most likely. Yeah.
Yeah, and so she is radicalized in that environment, and a lot of other people are given scholarships to Harvard, over that period and later. And a lot of them go on to basically create the human rights infrastructure that you are critiquing on your blog, like um, with this new use of law and this kind of progressive social transformation kind of objective. It's not
Okay.
about objective truth. It's about we're going to change society for the better. True, and it's a whole class of person.
But what
Like,
I find troubling, Don, though, is I think I articulated the last day the difference between natural law and positive law. Now, positive isn't in the sense that it's opposite negative. It means from the verb to posit, to place, or fiat. So whatever I say goes, regardless of whether it's grounded or has any moral foundation at all. And that was one of the issues I think I mentioned the last day as well that emerged during the Nuremberg trials, because technically the Third Reich had gone through a valid legal process because of the Weimar constitution. And I think I think it was at Article 19 that allowed emergency measures to, or emergency conditions would ultimately, it could trigger emergency powers. And of course, from there, you got a kind of dictatorship, whatever. But I suppose we're living in a world now, and this is once you remove the notion of inherence, and that's what I was saying earlier on, from nature, from which is a natural law concept, from human rights. Well, then you're privy really to the diktats of those who are powerful. And the thing is, they've created this new nomenclature called personhood rights, right? And what a lot of listeners may not be aware is that the United Nations recognizes certain natural entities like rivers, the Wangui River in New Zealand, and I think there's a range of mountains in South America, and could be Peru or Ecuador, I can't remember, that has been granted personhood rights. So obviously, a mountain or a range of mountains or a river obviously can't vocalize itself. So it will have people talking on its behalf. But when you think of it, those same personhood rights would be denied to the unborn, who are actually human beings. And not only that, and of course, corporations have corporate personality. They have rights. So some corporations have more rights than some human beings.
Mm.
And the irony is, right, this is promoted by all these progressive liberals and these fake socialists who who will try and tell you that they're interested in the most vulnerable out there, but they're not. As you said earlier on, this is just a mask of reputation because it gives them some kind of social prestige. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, just for example, there's two very good examples from Britain: Ricky Tomlinson, actor, and Gary Neville, the footballer. Both of them are multimillionaires, and I confirm this. But they'll still consider themselves socialists, while at the same time uh, harnessing the power of capitalism to maintain their economic base. Because ultimately, like as I said about the vegan, you may disagree with veganism, but you'll say at least the person is being consistent. You'll give them that, right? But these people aren't, because it's not about the moral conviction, because there's no personal cost.
They're not paying any price to do any of these things.
Exactly. This is all about look at me. Because if you tell them, for example, you've got notorious Irish journalists, right, especially on TV, and they'll go, "Oh, this is terrible. That's terrible." Like, if you ask them to say, "Okay, can you commit on television here and now to lead from the front?" They'll turn off. We'll switch over now. We'll go to our break, because it's bull. It's performance.
Yeah, I saw that actor. You know the guy from Game of Thrones, the little guy, the English actor. I can't think of his name, but he's
Oh,
the guy who played the fame. He's the Hobbit, the kind of character or whatever in Game of Thrones. Like, and I saw a video of him the other day, like where he's like reading out this like poem or something about that woman who was killed by ice in the car like a few weeks ago. You know, and it's like this guy literally flew to New York or whatever
Peter
the hell this was.
Dinklage.
Like,
Yeah, Peter Dinklage.
yeah, it's that. I mean, I can't know. I don't watch television. I don't know these people, but like I see them in memes or whatever. That's about it. But like he's just reading this thing out, and you're like, man, you know, you literally went the whole way to America because of memes. Like you know, you are an idiot. Like you're just a complete moron. You know,
Well, I
and
think he could be
it's so
American, but the irony with him, Don, though, is he was the same guy that denied other fellow dwarves, and they call themselves dwarves,
mm,
opportunities when uh, that live action film about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs came out. He said, "Oh, we should not be kind of categorizing dwarves as kind of mythical creatures, kind of things." But a load of dwarves came out and said, "How dare you? You made it on the basis of being a dwarf. You
yeah.
lost countless people, whether stunt dwarves, I suppose, stunt or kind of dwarf actors, whatever, opportunities. They were livid. They said it was pure hypocrisy. And that, you see, is because these guys thrive. Once they make it, right, they don't care about anybody else. That's why you'll get some working class guys who make good, and they'll they'll toe the line. They'll toe the uh, the globalist line because they fear that their career will be gone. But then they'll uphold. I mean, there was a guy called Garen Noon or something,
Oh,
and
remember
he
him? Yeah, the Irish guy. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and he just mentioned about immigration, a very rational, fairly middle of the road statement, right? Absolutely destroyed. He backtracked, and sure, you can't get him off RT or any of the Irish networks. He was on I mean, he was doing choir singing. I mean, I was saying Chini, like he was all over Christmas, like
Yeah, so he actually got back on TV and all because he
yeah,
walked. Right, yeah, yeah.
that's
It's
right.
amazing. Isn't that just so like I don't know. I've just no time for that.
Because
You know.
he was going to pay a personal cost. You see,
Yeah.
that's the thing.
Yeah, and you know what? The funny thing is, a lot of those people will never forgive him anyway.
Well, that's the ultimate irony. I mean, I think what society has proven the last couple of years is that you don't apologize. If you hold a conviction, hold it, because you're going to be destroyed anyway.
Yeah.
And in fact, you're going to look even worse by, apologizing. And like my problem in a way with the likes of Graham Lennon, and listen, through my own Catholic faith, there's redemption for all, prodigal son, etc. But would he be where he is now ideologically were it not because it hit home that he paid a personal cost?
Mm.
If he didn't, would he still be calling us loads of, oh, you're this, you're that? And
I
what,
know, yeah, and he'd probably tell you that he wouldn't himself. Honestly, he'd
yeah.
probably say, "I've heard him speak like that," and he kind of sounds like he
Oh,
kind
yeah,
of
I mean, I
had a
grant him
major,
that. Yeah.
realization with what happened to him.
I
But
mean, it's
worth asking.
like Philip Reeve. Have you ever heard of the theorist Philip Reeve? And he said that
Yeah,
ultimately we moved from transcendental man, sounds like a movie there, to psychological man. And again, it coheres with the notion that we've entered this therapeutic culture where it's all about massaging our feelings. And again, it seems to be, for me anyway, a convergence of all these different social pressures. And what we can't deny is coordination behind it, as you said, that these things don't arrive ex nihilo. There must be some element of kind of either opportunism or setting in motion or whatever. And I don't deny that at all. And the thing is, like, we've become accustomed now in society that anything that you label a conspiracy is automatically ridiculed. But as I explained the last time, conspiracies happen all the time. A conspiracy is a coordinated move by just a number of people that is covert in order to achieve a greater end, effectively. Like every cabinet meeting, every corporate meeting is really a type of conspiracy, strategic to reach a strategic end, really. But
yeah,
again, this is part of kind of the suppression of dissent. Oh, sure, we can cut that off at the pass because we can just label that as, stupid or tinfoil hat, and therefore people will stop listening. They won't actually take the issue on its merits.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think that that is like the great lesson. I think that could be that I'd like to kind of hope people will take from all of this because we're talking around this kind of issue of power, broadly speaking, in a liberal society, as we are living in. And I think it speaks to like you've outlined different examples of how power basically has been wielded, um, very effectively in in the church or in the nation in our nation broadly, and how it has driven all this change. And I think there's a lesson here for people who would be nationalists or conservative minded or kind of right wing but not conservative or whatever. And the lesson is, I would say that the right is generally not good at wielding power at all, and hasn't been very good at it. Even you brought up the example there of David Quinn, for example, earlier on.
Mhm.
Like David Quinn has a modicum of like respectability in within he has a column, he has a large Twitter account, he's got relationships with people all over the world or whatever. He has a status. Um, but in like you said earlier, he uses his platform often to basically take on liberal positions in some respects. He accepts certain liberal framings of certain issues. He makes some good points, but then he'll toe the line. He'll say, "Well, I don't care if Ireland becomes like dominated by Indians or something." He'll have no problem with that, and that speaks to how the right often just gives away its own values and just takes on the framing of kind of of liberalism. And I think if the lesson here is that we have to basically get much better at wielding power. I think how Trump is handling ICE in America, for example, I think that's a bad example of power. Because those people are inexperienced. They're going. I don't know if we talked about this a little bit offline. Actually, I think that's what it was. But essentially, what's going on there with that is that the right is kind of caught up in like the kind of trappings of what power would look like. Well, we'd walk in and we'd just arrest people, but in reality, there's a whole structure that you're walking into. You're walking into a scenario where you're not in control. You don't have control over these institutions like the police, the
Mm.
mayor, the state governor, and all of this stuff, and they're all against you. And so these activists who are, a lot of them are highly motivated. A lot of them are lunatics, quite frankly. A lot of these progressive and left wing activists are to some extent supported by the state, but really they're just empowered to do what they do. They're not arrested or they're not prosecuted when they do a lot of these things. And so for them the cost isn't as high, so they can afford to get in
That's
the
right.
way and cause these problems. And then the media is part of this conspiracy. You could call it a conspiracy.
Oh yeah, definitely.
These
It's coordinated.
Yeah, there's a coordination, and then there's like innate kind of activist zealots that are willing to do all kinds of illegal things, basically. And then there's a media which is quite happy to present it in a certain way.
But
So
the structure is so there's a malaise in the structure that is so deep though, Don. Like I came across there and I don't watch a whole lot of television myself, but I found myself bored and this uh series was on and somebody told me to watch it, right? And the subject area is not something that I particularly want to watch, but it was on and it was called Devil in Disguise. It was actually a docudrama, I guess, about a serial killer, John Wayne Gacy. And it was quite harrowing in many ways, right? But what struck me at most, what angered me most, to be honest, because I did a postgrad years ago on penology and, the nature of prison systems and how victims now seem to be way down the hierarchy, at the bottom of the hierarchy. And at the end of this program, it said that Gacy had 20 appeals, right, when he was found guilty of murdering like countless people. And yet, there is no symmetry. Like, it should be weighted in favor of the victim, right? But it's not even a symmetry. Because, as I kind of argued when I was doing that research, because I had to do a bit of a dissertation, I'd argued that no victim gets parole from their suffering, from their grief, right? And the person with all the agency who committed the crime and has been found guilty of the crime, they're given every opportunity for rehabilitation, even under is a human rights law in Europe that there must always be a prospect of release, even if it doesn't happen. And that was the Bamber case, I think it came out a couple of years ago. And but like victims are never given that same sense of um, temporal hope, shall I say, or alleviation from grievance. And that explains as well that the structures in the West now are so corrupted. Academia as well. Absolutely, completely bonkers stuff going on there. Um, the level of education, apparently, there's information now saying that a lot of the graduates are incapable of even reading, having done a
yeah,
degree. Like, that's
yeah, it's
pathetic.
extraordinary. Yeah, I've seen studies like that, and I mean, a similar thing. You could look at a similar issue is the manner that ideologies are used to basically
Right.
mask power. So, like an ideology, like I've seen, there's a lot of academics, uh, that are close to the education system who are writing in the area of like queer theory, for example. And
Mm,
so what they are basically, they're essentially employed by the state, because they
right.
get research grants, and they're drawn on in official reports to justify changes in the education system or
That's
something
right.
like that. And so what you'll have is then that this fringe kind of like very questionable theoretical nonsense basically is then presented as like, well, this is like
Oh,
science. We're doing science
that's
here.
yeah.
When in reality it's just theory. It's just theory. That's all it
Yeah, and
is.
a lot of it's just subjective
Yeah.
waffling, to be honest.
But
But
they
like,
they have a role within the system, and that actually, like, and for the ironic thing is that they're so obsessed with power. They're always talking about structures of power, but yet there's like, if you look at their own role in the system is uh, as justifying what power wants to basically do with the education system or with any other system. It's the same with legal theory, and with how you get these lenient sentences for particular groups. who do particularly heinous acts. And then if someone is like, I just think of that. I always reminded of that case of the Charlottesville case in America, where that young guy,
Yes, yeah.
James Fields, his name was, and he was basically tried as a terrorist and
Mm,
all the rest of it, and he was given like hundreds of years of sentences cumulatively for what amounted to a car accident.
mm.
And even if it wasn't a car accident, even if he panicked in the moment and uh, wanted to get out of there or whatever, I mean, it's insane to think that a man can be locked up forever with
Well,
no.
compare that then, Don, to the guy in Germany who violated a girl, and actually another girl who complained, is it via WhatsApp to him, ended up almost with identical time in prison.
Yeah,
Like this is absurd. Like, and the thing is,
it's evil.
it is evil, and I hate saying it, like, but there seems to be a preponderance of. I think there was a woman justice who was involved in that, and in Germany, I think. I mean, a lot of this is driven by a lot of women. Like there was a character in Elena, I can't remember her surname, a Spanish. I think she's the leader of Podemos, and she had championed and celebrated the fact that there was going to be a legalization of over a 500,000 migrants. And she said, "Oh, we're sticking it to the far right." And you're kind of going, what level of maturity and hatred must one have in order to purposely destroy your own country? A country, by the way, and those 500,000, I think a lot of them were Muslims, was that their ancestors would have died trying to free Spain from Muslim rule. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like we see the same today. That I was only saying it to a relative that why did any Irish patriot die for Ireland when these comfortable contemporaries of ours would just hand it away, and not only that, if you raised even an arm to query why you're doing it, you'd be lambasted. Like that's why I fear there could like there's no way that uh, everybody is going to sit back and take this. That's my fear, right?
Mm.
Because it is a natural response. Because like I just think we're heading in a very dangerous road. And my younger brother said to me years ago, he said, and he spotted it way before I did, and he said, "Do you know, if they think Rwanda, and if you look at the Rwanda case there of the genocide, what happened there was so much dehumanization. I see it especially in America. I don't think America's gone as a unified country as far as I'm concerned. I don't think there's any way the genie will be put back in the bottle. Same
Yeah,
with
and
Britain.
America is our future because we're basically taking on their system when you think
That's
about
right.
it.
Actually, a lot of the grievances they've been transported here with absolutely no context,
Yeah,
which is
and that's exactly what we saw. What we said, what we spoke about earlier in the discussion was that elites have been able to basically take their own historical responsibilities for particular acts like slavery or whatever it is, or particular wars or whatever, and they've been able to pass that on through democratization.
right.
Everyone now is guilty of this, and then they're able to basically manufacture a new dispensation out of that, which says, well, now we have a responsibility to take migrants. It's the exact same with that situation there where
But it kind of copper
everyone
fastened as
now is
well,
like
though.
as if we had slaves in the American South. Like what even is this nonsense?
But in a way, it confirms for me, right, the whole notion of the franchise. It's like saying we can sell burgers in this franchise, so we'll sell burgers in that franchise. So we'll just transform the grievances in one country and just neatly package them in another country, despite the fact that there's no context at all.
Yeah, and our left now is essentially a kind of a new left kind of product.
Oh
Really,
yeah,
it's based on
managerial
American
class.
progressive
That's what
politics
they're.
and managerialism. And one of the great actual ways, one of the things we didn't actually mention tonight, which actually I had a little note here to bring this up, was that a lot, the way we talk about the values that people have now, a lot of this is about status and everything else.
Yeah.
Well, status signaling. And a lot of the ways that this is actually given to people is actually through corporations and management culture, broadly
Mm,
speaking. So if you look at a lot of the kind of therapeutic state. A lot of the instruments and the methods that were developed for use and deployment through the state, a lot of them come out of managerial theory and looking at group dynamics.
Mm.
And if you look at someone like Kurt Lewin, and then that led on to an institution was created and everything. But basically, that was used then in things like multicultural societies in America to basically work out kind of fixes for ethnic grievances and strife that was occurring during the 60s and 70s. And that was all that kind of stuff was then brought into managerial culture. It was brought into the office boardroom. And that's
Mm.
where you get DEI from later on.
Mm.
That's, this kind of corporate culture. It's inherently an American kind of progressive slash um, pragmatic kind of philosophy, grounded in like a very much like a multicultural, multiracial society in which you're only supposed to be an individual. Your relationship with everyone else is purely transactional and economic. And one of the mistakes that the right makes is that it purely gives up everything cultural and social and only operates on an economic level.
I'm
Well, as
glad you
long as I have
mentioned
my
that.
money, as long
Yeah,
as I have my money,
yeah.
I'm okay. As long as
Because
as long as my wallet isn't affected,
that's right.
even though it is affected badly. But anyway,
I'm
even
glad you mentioned that, Don, because I
yeah,
do hear other commentators saying, listen, it's all about the GDP. It's
yeah,
all about X, Y, and Z, which again goes back to what I said in a previous time, that my understanding was that the state was kind of a structural kind of bureaucracy, shall I say, to aid the nation, and the economy again served the nation. But now it's completely the inverse. We will sacrifice the nation for the sake of the economy. And the thing is, the economy isn't indigenous, neither in composition or in management, because by and large, a lot of the structures exist outside the state, especially since 2008. And the reality is, there's very little production now in Europe. It's all been outsourced. So, I mean, I just think there's going to be a convergence, I think, over the next couple of years, could be even the next couple of months. I think there's talk of digital IDs, which again goes back to the issue of power. And of course, they'll sell it to the people as kind of this great convenience in the same way that they were able to persuade people not to use cash. And one thing as well that worries me is that World Economic Forum kind of video that went viral, people always focus on the first or kind of your own nothing and be happy. People seem to forget what was said in other sections of that video. And one was about mass immigration, and the other one was, about, oh, it's just, I've had a bit of a brain freeze. But if you look at the other aspects of that video, I mean, they've been signaling what's going to happen, and it is unfolding now. And my
yeah,
worry is that people have been so domesticated, shall I say, intellectually, that they no longer rely on their senses anymore. They rely on slogans, bypassing critical faculties, emotionalism. That's and And when you have a society that no longer can think, then you're in trouble, major
yeah. And I
trouble.
mean, the mass education kind of model that we've had since the '60s has really not improved, I would say, people's rationality at all.
Not at all.
I would
And that's
say what
another.
it has done is that it has actually created more of this new class
Mm,
that I'm talking about as being the
that's
cultural
right.
tastemakers, the kind of the NG, like most of these NGOs are post '60s. So basically, like they became like a lot of them were actually developed by very young people at that time. It was actually
Mm,
people in college and all coming out of college and getting into things like development economics and then going into the NGOs. And they got really radicalized, and so a lot of this is downstream from that, like, and of course, and on a deeper level, I believe, and this kind of I'm drawn on a lot of like Eric Vogelin's kind of ideas with this. Is that my overall kind of view is that when you're saying there about how people have been depoliticized in that sense and kind of or not kind of disconnected from their own faculties, so they cannot use their because you're supposed to be in liberal politics. You're supposed to be able to use your intellect, and you're supposed to overcome your emotions, and you're supposed to be a rational actor. But
But that was the deep flaw, though. I think that what's his name? Who's the father of modern liberalism? What's his name again? He escapes me.
Rawls,
On Liberty. Um,
Rawls, is it?
no, the other guy on Liberty. Um,
Uh,
oh, I can't remember. Mill.
John Stuart Mill, is it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
like he had articulated as well, or expressed the idea that the marketplace of ideas, the best ideas will win out. But that presupposed that every actor was rational.
yeah, and it
I mean,
presupposes that there is a market as
that's
well.
right.
Like, is there a market?
Well, I mean, even when you were talking earlier on about charities, right? Most charities have inbuilt incentives for their actual kind of telos or the purpose of their charity to fail. Because when you think of it, as a charity that is set up to help the homeless, if the homeless are housed, well, then you've no need of a charity. So there's an inbuilt kind of incentive for it not to succeed.
Hmm.
And that's why all these things are so commercialized. Like, I remember saying to someone, they said, "Oh, I work in charity." And I said, that's a bit of a kind of a contradiction, isn't it? Because like to work for charity means that you're getting paid to do something kind. Well, if you're paid to do it, it's not kindness, is it?
Yeah,
And like you've got same with all these CEOs. That's that scandal that arose from CEOs where they were saying there that all these CEOs were getting these huge salaries, and you had all this garbage come out saying, "Oh, to hire the best, you must pay the best." But then you're saying, "Hang on here, but this is the charity sector. You can still hire the best and not pay them an awful lot because they're motivated by the will to do good, as in the mission of the charity. Is that not what charity is? But that's why these are not charities. Like
yeah. It's another arm of a kind of a. It's more of a corporate entity.
lobby, yeah, it's another kind of unaccountable lobby system.
And if you go back to the early days of philanthropy, I mean, a lot of these vehicles were created because of there was this huge amount of capital was accrued in the progressive era. That's where the big philanthropies came out of.
Mm,
And the values that they like, because they became the big supporters of charity, of campaign. Like, there was missionaries, of course, tied up in it. I'm thinking of Rockefeller, obviously that's the obvious case, but like, they were involved in missionaries all over, and then they created these big charitable foundations.
that's
And
right.
the Reese Committee and all of these things, all of these various investigations, threw a lot of light on that, and they showed that there's a lot of power here. And so and that was what gave you the sexual revolution. So you're well aware of E. Michael Jones, obviously, but like, E. Michael Jones has this well, he's a number of books, but he has one of them I read was called Libido Dominandi.
That's right.
And
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he's written a lot about like how like Kinsey in particular was basically promoted by the Rockefeller Foundation, and
Mm,
his theories became, through a campaign, through basically what you would call a strategic marketing
mm,
campaign, became, or communications campaign, strategic communications campaign, became the basis of the sexual revolution, which, if you look at it, actually was a desire by the most powerful economic forces in the world, basically, to get women into the workplace
mm.
so that they could be taxed. And so that basically, and this has given us, what has given us? It's given us broken homes,
That's right.
it's given us low fertility,
Mm.
and they're also promoting fertility. They're also
And
promoting, and
femininity has been weaponized as well. Well, not femininity, but women in general.
yeah,
Because you will look across now that you daren't in the public field or in the public space, you dare not shout down a woman's opinion. And this has become very kind of now I think it's losing traction, especially with young men, which is great to see.
yeah,
But
and a
like,
lot of women too are realizing that they've been had.
oh, completely
Especially
had.
younger women, I think, actually
Like
a lot
I
of.
see women there on YouTube and they're crying into the camera going, "Nobody told me working would be so crap, that I
Yeah,
get crap money, that my boss is a jerk, blah blah." Like there was this myth built up, right? That men went off and had a great jolly, right, working, and women were at home at the stove. right? And with their children. And of course, very few men that I know enjoy going to their job. It's
Yeah.
boring, it's repetitive, it's stressful. You're working with most people that you don't even like. Your job or your boss can be a tyrant depending who it is. There's always these kind of competitive edge, and if you don't play the right politics, you won't get the promotion. Like, there's a reason why most people end up by retirement with their stomachs, with stomach problems, because it's a stressful environment.
Yeah.
But also, it discounted the fact that historically, and again, this is another big myth that I hear from the feminists, is that, and again, it targets kind of, the white male heterosexual, uh, that every white male in perpetuity in Europe was living a jolly out with the lads. The
Yeah, and
reality
once again,
is
that's just like, like like I think a lot of these like feminist historians and everything, and they seem to it's a very middle class thing, I think,
very
because
exceptionally.
their actual objectives are really like, well, I want that promotion. I want access to that kind of career or whatever. They're not campaigning to become like workers, really, like manual workers or anything like that,
Not at all. I mean, and we're not having a rant at women per se, but at
No, not
feminists,
at all. Love women. Absolutely.
exactly, literally.
Yeah.
But the point is, like, if you look even at World War One, the generations that were lost of young men, World War One, in war, men were expected as well to defend the castle, defend the town, defend the homeland, the fatherland, the motherland, whatever you call it. And they worked in the fields. They worked from a very young age in the mines. These were not glorious jobs. And again, it tries to kind of compress all men into
Yeah.
one kind of unit of privilege. This
And
is all
what is
just
it? It's a
pure
narrative.
garbage.
Like the idea of it is you look at it, it's actually designed. It's a narrative that has been deployed basically, and the aim is very clear. You're
Yeah,
supposed to create friction between men and women.
that's right.
You're supposed to get women out of the workplace, into the workplace, out of the home, and there's economic incentives to this. And these theories basically just create a lot of it actually destabilizes society,
Oh, big time.
and it
And
doesn't
the
actually
irony then,
make
though,
them have
Don,
power.
is these people pushing these policies that undermine, as I said the last day as well, fecundity. They're the same people then who will say to the people, listen, we're in danger, we're not reproducing, nobody will be there to pay your taxes or to fund your lifestyle when you're old through taxation. So we have to bring in loads of migrants. Right? It's a giant Ponzi scheme. And again, it's self-inflicted. And if there was an election tomorrow, Don, you and I know, right? Let's be honest. The same the same color of people, it might be different type of shade, but it's going to be the same color of people entering Dáil Éireann tomorrow if there was a new election. And there has to come a time, and I don't know if I said this the last day, and this is kind of this is probably a seminal point that I want to say actually tonight, even more so than even my thesis thing there, is that we've got to dismiss and get rid of this notion that we haven't played some role in this destruction ourselves as a people.
Hmm.
Because we're so easy to find scapegoats, the British, the Catholic Church, this, that, and the other. But the reality is, right, most people are still buying the Irish Times. They're still tuning into RT News Talk. They're still funding charities or working with them. They'll still vote for the same parties. They'll still go, sure, what's the harm? At the end of the day, this is probably one of the most kind of, dare I say, saddest moments in our history. And
Yeah.
I suppose as well, even historically, we have to concede as well, and it's inconvenient because it's uncomfortable. Like the page we nominated as our patron, or we nominated as our patron saint for our channel, Saint Oliver Plunkett, right? For multiple reasons. One is that he died a martyr, but he was actually convicted due to false testimony by a fellow Irish priest.
Mm.
There's a famous martyr as well up in Donegal, Father James O'Haggerty. I don't know if I mentioned him the last day,
I
but
think you did.
he also was the product of betrayal by his own brother-in-law. Like the level of treachery in this country is off the charts.
Yeah, and it's one of the, that is exactly, it's a great point you've made there. Actually, it's really good because it's like when I'm talking about elites, it can give the impression that I think that people are blameless, you know,
Exactly.
and of course they're not. And
No.
people make their decisions, you know. Like how many times have you talked to someone like that about any of these situations or political situations, and they say basically some variation of, well, sure, I'm okay, you know, as long as I
All
have
right.
my
Yeah.
job, you
Yes.
know, I'm doing fine, you know, and they don't care, you know, about their neighbors having to emigrate, or they don't care about someone losing their home or not being able to buy a home. If in the case of young people, they're not able to buy a home, and you know, and that speaks to the selfishness of the culture, you know, and a lot of these people will then claim to have bona fides as social activists or you know whatever it is, like, you know, so there is it's people have responsibility just because you live in a paradigm that is inherently, you know, about social engineering and technocracy and manufacturing consent and everything doesn't mean that you don't have responsibility, because if we can talk about this and acknowledge our own duplicity
Mm.
in it as actors, we have our we have minds of our own, we can choose not to pursue those kinds of things.
Exactly. And I mean, as I said, it is inconvenient to hear. It's uncomfortable to hear, but it's also honest and true because it's like this myth that the Fighting Irish. Well, that terminology is comes from America, really.
Yeah.
A lot of it was to do with either, Irish in the military or even just fighting in the streets. To be honest, when they emigrated, and I'm not having a pop at Irish people, but there's this impression outside of Ireland that, kind of, why don't you guys
The
kind of,
Irish won't put up with this, you
yeah,
know.
that's right. The
Yeah.
Irish won't put up with this, or why didn't you get the IRA? And you're kind of going,
Yeah, why don't the
getting
IRA
Irish
come
people
back?
like,
Yeah.
like it, like I think Irish America has to wake up as well. They still think that, Sinn Féin will help you guys, and
Yeah,
I'm kind of
A and two
going,
are getting in on that one now. In fairness to them, they're kind of going in with that kind of you know, um, objective, like to get ahead of the
the curve, yeah.
Shinners, like, and get that kind of money flowing in, you know, to create that war chest or whatever. But I find it all very cynical. You know, I find it all very cynical. All that whole
Listen, I
thing.
love Irish Americans. By the way, I have a good few friends on the channel. I'm not
Oh,
having a
absolutely.
pop.
No, no, it's not. It's not about Irish Americans. I'm more talking about the political parties who are going over there and basically manipulating them. Like when you see Shinners going over there, like they sit in front of a like a harp and an Irish flag, like, and then when you see them in Ireland, it's like, you know, diversity and,
That's right.
you know, equality and all the rest of it. Like they're basically they're basically social democrats, basically politically. But
But
there's a
can I
cynicism,
ask you a
like,
question,
you
Don?
know.
Do you think around the time of the Good Friday Agreement,
Yeah.
I mean, we know now that, and again, not to get too speculative, but just bear with me. But I'll ask you the question anyway. Around the time of the Good Friday Agreement, is it around 1998? Is it? And
Yeah.
we know that George Mitchell was had various. Shall I say, his name has been mentioned a few times in the Epstein files.
Yeah.
We know that Epstein flew into Ireland a few times. Bill Clinton, of course, was a big player. Guess who was there as well from the British side? Tony Blair.
Mm.
Uh, there's a lot of characters, and let's be honest, I mean, there's a few mentions of Ireland in those files, apparently, and I'd love if people
Yeah.
did
I'd love to do a stream on it if I could gather it together, you know, but I haven't got it together. But
like, I think there's a world out there, and this is the naivety that is played upon, by and large. I think if most of us saw the world for what it actually is, now we're kind of seeing it more and more, and we're disgusted by it, and it's quite, uh, it would cause a lament for many of us, really, to see how our own beloved country is falling apart. And by extension, I've the same love for my fellow Europeans and Americans, whatever, and across the world. I mean, listen, I don't fancy Uganda becoming, a part of the global Homo empire either. So
yeah,
this is
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
right, but I just I think there's a side to the world that has been exposed, and I suppose I can um, harness some kind of spiritual kind of uh, connection here that I find is kind of has made our existence up till now a bit of a con, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
Um, Maybe to elaborate on that, what I'm trying to say is that I think we took a lot of things for granted that may not have been true.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that you throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I think some people end up doing that because what you end up doing is you get rid of any foundation. But I mean, look at pretexts for war like Vietnam or kind of material that came out that we know that the Americans or the deep state have been prominent in unsettling or destabilizing at least 70 regimes, and then tell us
On
that
point
they're
right
the
now.
guardians of democracy. I mean, it's
Yeah, I mean, are you suggesting, because you're kind of opened up with like you're kind of talking about Ireland and these uh around the 98 Good Friday Agreement and everything. Are you kind of saying that are you kind of saying that we need to take a good look at all that period, like, and
yeah. Was there some kind of pivot
yeah.
at that stage that
Hmm.
added to maybe a trajectory that was set in motion already, but again, that there was some momentum added. I don't know. I'm only throwing it out
I mean,
there.
that was the period, I believe, where I think I believe that that is a period of very big importance, obviously. Um, and I think that it was the time where Ireland basically embarked fully on the diversity kind of agenda, and I think Sinn Féin embraced that as well, because I believe that is essentially an Anglo-American agenda. It's driven by economics and it's driven by certain social theory. And I think that 98 is it's a crucial period. Yeah. And after that, very quickly after that, we got our first national anti-racism strategy, and all of these NGOs began to basically
That's right.
collaborate around things like, and obviously it gave away sovereignty over the six counties basically to this process of, we're going to have a border poll, but the people who, as I understand it, the British have to basically say if the border poll can even happen. So it's all, I think that, yeah, it's a paradigm. It's a whole paradigm was introduced there, like, and it coincided, of course, then with the British and the Americans going into Iraq and Afghanistan
Mm.
uh, following 9/11. They're kind of gearing up.
Well,
So
it's like we keep hearing about kind of international order or whatever, or international rules, and I don't mean the Australian football, but the you know the more you scrutinize that too, the more you realize it's a complete and utter sham.
yeah,
Because like the
liberal
Russians were
democracy, liberal
treated,
international order. You mean?
yes,
Yeah, sham. Yeah, yeah,
like if you look at the way the Russians were, and I'm not even going to bother entertaining whether it's right or wrong. I can do it if you want, but I'd be more on the side of John Hirschma or Mearsheimer. But like, if you look at the way the Russians were treated, right, compared to what we now know was an illegal war for Iraq,
yeah.
like none of the constituent parts of Britain or America or any other collaborators, the French, whatever, were thrown out of FIFA or weren't allowed
Yeah.
to participate in any, or they weren't thrown out of the, Eurovision or whatever.
Well,
Like
yeah,
there
and
is,
the speech by the Canadian Prime Minister, Carney, went
mm,
viral there a week or so ago. And I listened to it. It's a notable speech, I suppose, in the sense that it does signify that they're kind of all admitting that it's bullshit.
mm,
The liberal international order is bullshit. It was always bullshit. Now that actually undermines their own position, because it says that they're the kinds of people who just take part in an order which is illegitimate and wrong,
mm, mm,
and based really. And look, let's be real. I mean, the power behind it is economic,
mm,
and so my whole argument around liberalism is essentially that liberalism is essentially has always been an economic thing. It's always been driven by economics and powerful financial institutions and forces basically. And so anything downstream from that is going to be based on that level of thought. It's going to be based on that level of thinking, you know. So you kind of once you throw away the kind of transcendental kind of meaning behind any kind of legal system, you end up and you take on a liberal one. It's going to be kind of about instrumental uh, ideas. So you're going to basically use the law to create the kind of society that liberal capital wants, you know, and that's the problem. So you can't really be a conservative and be a liberal, in my opinion.
Exactly. And I suppose even returning back to Yuval Noah Harari as well, and some of the kind of transhumanism that he's spoken about, is that, and I mentioned this as well before, so I hope I'm not repeating myself, but wealth in of itself doesn't motivate anybody as such, because ultimately wealth, to accumulate wealth, requires some other motivation on top of it, control and power. And if you listen to Yuval Noah Harari, he speaks of transhumanism and almost kind of we'll become the new gods. Well, it won't be you and me, Don, or it won't be Bridie O'Flaherty or Johnny Murphy. It'll be a select few, a cabal. And I think people really are handing away things under pretenses of security. It's like, it's right, a renegotiation of the social contract in many respects.
Yeah.
But this time it's kind of unbeknownst, people will actually have less rights than before.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if you like one of the milestones you brought up was the '98 era with Good Friday Agreement and everything, and you know how like you know you have the likes of um, Mitchell and all is you know is the main well he's one of the main kind of facilitators of the whole thing, and it raises this question of like, well, who is he working for really?
Mm,
And like what was the new Ireland that was being constructed, you know? And I think and another milestone that I always draw on more than that actually is the great financial crash of '08, which is like that's the collapse really of the American empire in an economic sense. And then there's a bailout. Now we're living in the my argument is that we're living in the result of that bailout.
mm,
All of the consequences that have come after that. And obviously Europe is tied to America inextricably. We're not going to be breaking off from America, just in case people a lot of people think that's going to happen. I think we're
yeah.
a long way from that ever happening, you know.
Well,
But
America's more entrenched than ever with Israel. And I think you can even arguably go back as far as kind of the establishment of the Federal Reserve. I'm not even going to get into that, but
yeah.
I think there is an argument being made that there's been this pretense of kind of participation in governance for a long time that has actually been quite illusory. And sadly, as long as people, especially the middle classes, like even if you look at the French Revolution, that was largely fomented by the middle class. Like uh,
Mm.
Robespierre was a lawyer, Saint Just, I think, was a lawyer, Danton and a few others were middle class. And the irony is they succumbed to the guillotine themselves, which invariably happens. But
Yeah, and what was going on is that they had a lot of their pamphlets and everything, and so they were proliferating their own kind of political ideologies, you know, and ideas, and that
well, they became,
radicalized the middle,
as you
you
said,
know.
they became like you said, where there's kind of a new religiosity. You're right, because that's what the Girondins and the other revolutionaries they got rid of Catholicism only to replace it with another type of religion.
The Church of what they got the Church of Humanity or whatever,
That's
wasn't
right,
it?
Church
Yeah,
of Reason or whatever.
yeah,
And like the same with Bolshevism, like the state became their god. And so when people say, oh, like this is, and I think again, I hope I'm not repeating myself because I don't know what I said the last day, but the whole role of secularism, I mean, the notion that that's neutral is absolutely absurd. It
yeah.
promotes a worldview, so it cannot be neutral. So, and this is what people fall for, but it's all very choreographed.
Yeah, and see, it's one of the things that Schmidt is good at is he basically he explains modern political philosophy and thought basically as actually just secular theology. They're just taking the earlier structures and they're making them secular, and then Vogelin kind of says that well that means that the secular thing is kind of revolutionary because you move from trying to achieve like things in a kind of a in a sense of order or a sense of like truth, and essentially then it's all brought into the intramundane level where it's all in politics and you're trying to realize utopian ideals in politics. And that's a lot of the human rights architecture, which we observe as a kind of an instrument of power wielded by this kind of middle class or upper middle class kind of, grouping who are radicalized. But actually, it's actually, they're actually attempting to realize kind of theological concepts in the in an unrealistic way, which we can't ever have full equality. There's no such thing as equality, really. Like you can have truth and you can have justice, but it doesn't mean that we're all the same or that we're all you can make people the same, and you can't level people out like that. You know, and
Yeah, and I wrote an article as part of one of my Substack contributions, I suppose, about the cultic nature of modernity as well.
mm,
And again, that kind of coheres with what you were talking about, kind of religiosity. Because when you think of it, the response by a lot of people to progressivism, as in trying to challenge it, is a cultic response. Because it's inaccessible to kind of rational kind of uh, reversion, shall I say, or conversion therapy, even. And that's what makes it quite immune. And that's why that's why it's really important to diagnose the problem before you can really attempt to start some form of assault on it, I guess. Um,
yeah, this is all necessary work, in my opinion. Like this kind of thing that we're engaged in here, like it's important to kind of to really do some real thinking, and I think that's where that's why I'm a critic of populism.
mm,
Hands up, I don't like populism because I think populism distracts people. It actually often leads people to just take as granted certain assumptions that are totally wrong.
mm,
And you
mm,
see that with protest movements that just peter out, or just people just get arrested for no real reason, because they're not actually understanding the structure that they're kind of living in, and
yeah.
they're taking liberal democracy's propaganda about itself and taking it literally and saying, "Well, I have the right to do this." Well, the truth is that if you go into a court, you're going to have the book thrown at you because the judge decides he is sovereign in that situation. You're not. You
I
know.
suppose I will concede that they might have some kind of psychological value or spiritual value that if people meet up, they network, they feel a sense that they're doing something because for some people, going on a protest might be all is they conceive as participation. So do concede that it has some value, but
Yeah.
I agree. I think ultimately, as regards to a means to an end, it's going to achieve nothing, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, no. What happens is you get the kind of like the really kind of motivated people want to do something, but then what will happen is the opportunists will
That's
take the
right.
energy created by that movement and kind of use it for themselves.
That's a good
And so
point.
that's where the center. This is why I really hate conservatives. I really hate them because they are the ones like that are positioned to basically take your movement
Yeah.
and
But
do
I
what they
certainly
want with
don't
it. Like,
consider myself a conservative because I
oh,
would
me
have
either. No.
a radical kind of criticism as well. I just see conservatism constantly compromising. And
Yeah, and I mean, if like, I believe the post-war conservative movement is an artificial construct itself. So
well,
I believe what we call the conservative movement (TM) is essentially an American thing that's constructed basically by National Review and William Buckley of the National Review, who's a Skull and Bones guy, with George Bush and all that. But basically, designed to basically take nativism, to take real nationalism, to make the because there was an actual conservative movement in America that was anti-war.
mm,
It was kind of populist. It had elements of like social conservatism. It had like hostility to international power
mm.
influencing America. It was anti-United Nations. For
Alien, Alien, is it, or what's his name? Buchanan, what's his name?
Pat Buchanan, yeah, he
Yeah,
led the
alien
kind of
conservatives.
revolt for a while in the 90s. But then again, people criticize him because he compromised or whatever. But yeah, Buchanan. I like Buchanan honestly, but like, um, this idea of America as a global actor, like and because America was always supposed to be oppositional to that, was supposed to stay out of foreign entanglements. And if you look at the modern conservative movement that's been constructed, that you get elements of it popping up in Ireland. It's not really marketable in Ireland, but it doesn't feel right because it's not organic in my opinion. And by attempting to kind of link itself to foreign interventionism and everything, it's basically undermining itself because it's saying that we're actually part of a big global kind of transformation agenda.
But
Um,
even which, I mean, you can apply the same really to Europe. I mean, Ireland's situation in Europe now, people think that, oh, we're a big player. We're not. We're a colony of Brussels. That's what we are, effectively. And because we're so insecure, especially the leadership, and there a lot of them are kind of vying for uh, bigger roles, more money, more power, that they have to be best in show. And of course, you've got all these sycophants then below them who want to rise the ladder again, all for prestige, all for. And of course, there is a cost. Of course, there's no personal cost. There's a cost to the nation, the survival of the nation and our culture. And I don't know where we go, to be honest. I think, but I do think that the first thing you have to do is diagnose the problem, or at least. And again, we started this conversation. We probably end now, but about kind of epistemic humility. Like you and I are just having a casual chat here about what we think is going on. It doesn't follow that we're saying we know what's going on. Now we might have an aspect of the truth, but I think it's important, as you said, to talk about these things.
yeah, no, there actually is utility in doing this. So I'm a big opponent of people who say that engaging in intellectual kind of movements, etc., is like some kind of pointless act or something. I think that's the opposite, actually. I think
Yeah.
engaging in populist kind of movements without intellectual movement is far more dangerous because you don't actually understand your own mind, and so essentially you kind of fall into a trap of someone else's making. They can manipulate your movement. Populism is very dangerous. As you can see that in the UK with Farage and all, like they're in a position where they've had a kind of a revolutionary moment where the Conservatives and Labour are both hated basically, and it was to the extent the Conservative Party was so hated that it actually gave birth to a legitimate third party.
Mm.
And but this third party is led by Farage, who, in my opinion, is very milk toast and is now taking in all these conservatives. He's not given these young, interesting, highly motivated young people who have basically given up a lot to basically take part in all of this. He's not giving them a chance. He's taking mainstream kind of conservative uh, people who are traitors, quite frankly. People who have taken part in all of the destruction. The Conservatives brought in more immigrants than anyone into Britain.
Well, exactly. You see,
You know,
that's another thing. I mean, people go on about Labour. There is a kind of uni-party structure across the West with all the power, and as regards to Farage, he's just a safety valve to release some pressure because he's not going to do anything. I mean, he's on the record for saying, "Oh, we'll eliminate kind of Eastern European immigration, but we'll concede Commonwealth immigration." But sure, that's ludicrous. Um, and he's all he like. I think I can't remember the particular policy because it's a long time ago, and it's British politics really. No, it affects us all in many ways, but he kind of recanted on that when there was a bit of pressure applied to him. But a lot of people were kind of disappointed. I can't remember the exact policy, but I don't know. Same with Tommy Robinson. There's all these release valves.
yeah,
Uh,
he's just an absolute waste of time. Yeah, he actually angers me, to be honest. It's just absolutely disgraceful. Like how he's such a like, and he is mentioned in these. He's discussed by Bannon and all in these Epstein files, but that's his whole thing is just incredibly subversive because
yeah,
basically he's linking you to this Zionist campaign, which is totally self motivated. You know,
completely. I mean,
so very dangerous, actually, a dangerous person. But I'll just read some super chats if you just quickly,
okay.
not super chats, just chats, people comments that people have made, just if one or two, just to pick out a few lads here.
Do any negative ones for the laugh.
Yeah, there's not much there, but just to say, Olin B, he says there, I think we've eclipsed Schmitty in thought and we're moving into Landian accelerationism,
Yeah,
entropy.
that's
We'll see.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with Nick Land that much, are you, Bosco? Or are
I
you?
very vague, but I'd have a kind of cursory. But there's no way if you ask me now to explain him, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
To be
Well, he's
honest.
he's actually kind of difficult to. I mean, I'm not an expert on him either, but like he is interesting. He created that term accelerationism,
All right.
and he's liked by people on the left and the right. Kind of, he's kind of a funny character, but long story. But he basically believes that we're kind of going to this kind of AI kind of is going to become like kind of like sentient and kind of destroy the world pretty much.
Well,
So,
well, sorry to cut across you again. I
yeah,
know
yeah,
you're talking
whatever.
about, but I see AI actually as the quintessential bureaucrat.
Mm,
Because if this is going to take over a lot of kind of bureaucratic faculties, I mean, what do we assume? What do we think of when we talk about bureaucracy? But this indifferentism, this lack of I mean, as it stands, when you contact human, or I was going to say human resources, customer service, there's this kind of script that they cannot. It's like a containment um, with AI when you try to ask it questions it doesn't want to answer. The same with kind of customer service kind of representatives. They cannot go beyond the boundaries of the script. But imagine, at least you know there's a human being there. You know, by and large, there's going to be, you're going to come across someone usually with some level of empathy that might be able to escalate your issue further up. But when you're talking about AI, it's like this is just dystopian.
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I've been in it. We've all had an experience of like trying to navigate these like fake chatbots that
Mhm.
you're put up against to try and call a corporation or something like or some public and all you get is a chatbot kind of linking you to a page that has nothing to do with what you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, but and AI is more complicated than that too, of course. But yeah, but that's land. It's interesting, all right. Yeah. I don't know. I wouldn't be. I mean, he's kind of related to Yarvin. Someone brought up Curtis Yarvin earlier. Actually, I see in the chat as well. I
Right.
don't know what your views of him are. He's Mencius Moldbug.
Don't know anything about him.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's just kind of neo reaction.
Right.
Um, but I agree with some of his ideas about like and he talks a bit about the Puritans and all. There was another another E. Michael Jones tweet went kind of viral the other day. He was talking about how America was founded by these Puritan kind of freaks or whatever. And he has a point, like but anyway,
Yes.
Yarvin kind of trucks in some of those kinds of ideas too. And I'm kind of open to it. I think there's a lot of truth in that in
Yeah.
some aspects.
Well, I
Um,
would. I mean, a lot of it's funny. I was looking at an article there the other day about kind of the or the theological roots maybe of Puritanism, and like John Knox, the Presbyterian, played a huge role in the rigidity. Because if you look actually at a lot of the early reformers, they weren't as okay. They, from my point of view, they were still heretics, but their language was okay at times vitriolic. But John Knox was a total different category, and he really informed some of the puritanical beliefs that would have been held by some of those who travelled on the Mayflower and settled in Jamestown and all those places, and
mm,
Cromwell as well, of course. This virulent anti-Catholic kind of
yeah.
belief system.
Yeah, I mean Yarvin's kind of thing, which it's actually it was it's yeah, it's Last Regale brought that up actually about Yarvin. He says he has this theory called neo-cameralism, which is basically that the modern state should give away to kind of like stock corporations,
Yeah.
like the British East India Company or something. Which I would disagree with too. Like, but his point is that that corporations are kind of like dictatorships,
Mm,
and because he's a critic of democracy, which I think I am too, in fairness. But like he's saying that like a CEO could be kind of democratically elected. A CEO in a corporation is chosen to do a job,
mm,
but that it would be much better if that was if our countries were kind of like that. We had kind of dedicated rulers and everything.
mm.
and kind of got away from this kind of democratic kind of fuzziness. But yeah, interesting. Yeah, interesting characters. He has terrible takes on Ireland, I have to say, from what I've seen of his Twitter account. But anyway, uh, yeah. Mark Brown 181 says George Bernard Shaw promulgated the transactional value nature of humanity. It's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mark,
Justify
that's
your
Mark,
existence.
actually one of our saints and scholars.
Oh, very good. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it. Um, yeah, Astrogale also says exactly they have psychological data / nudge psychology and various ways to pull up the drawbridge behind them. One example was there was when they changed the electoral boundaries in 2024. That's in relation to what we were talking about in
Mm.
America with ICE. So yeah, he's speaking there to all the different structures and things that have been moved around and that people are walking into and they're not aware of. Um, Yeah, and Lastergale says the Puritan history stuff from Yarvin is fine. I agree with a lot. The issue I have is the state run as a corporation stuff, yeah, which seems to be influencing a lot of high up people. Yeah, because there's actually, it seems that he's influencing, well, I don't know how to what extent, but he seems to be influencing some of the Trump administration, perhaps JD Vance. And I think he's met JD Vance and Trump actually. So
Really?
he's kind of seen. See, there's actually people are writing critiques of Yarvin at the minute
Mm.
about all this, and they're saying like that Yarvin and Thiel and Musk are basically part of this
Drama.
technocratic takeover of the American kind of state structure, basically. Um, I'm kind of I've a lot of thoughts on it. I'm not sure what I fully think about all that, but it's definitely seems to be some truth to it.
Well, that's the kind of difficulty, though, with systems, as I said about Godel, because we might be commenting on a system, but there's a system w- that, or there's part of the system that is not visible to us either.
Mm.
People talk about the deep state, and we don't know how much power they wield, uh, whether it is accessible at all. Um, so if there's any change, kind of any prima facie change, superficially, is that real? Is that real, or is it a way of softening any criticism directed behind the scenes? And that's what makes it quite difficult, really.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's all very true. Um, Yeah, and as Simon says, 6905 says the biggest result of the Good Friday Agreement is the elimination of Articles 2 and 3 of the Constitution. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. We could do a whole stream.
Remember, they're trying to, I suppose, as well. We see it a lot of, or at least some broadsides from the media, that they're trying to suggest that if there is going to be a unified Ireland, it's going to be a different type of Ireland, um, effectively displacing even the culture of Ireland. To again, this is I don't trust this kind of strategic move, because we know now that people can promote something with a view to effectively having a different end to what the population effectively are told. Um, so, if I'm making any sense, I need to reframe that. Like, I just get very nervous when I hear people talking about, oh, we're going to, in order to have a unified Ireland, we're going to have to recalibrate a lot of the values, the normative elements of society, even down to the flag, the anthem, right?
Yeah.
But then I've kind of said, well, are they actually looking for a united island as opposed to a united Ireland? Now, people might say, oh, that's just semantic. And I'm going, no, not really. Because what makes Ireland Ireland are the people and its culture. And if
Yeah.
they're not interested in preserving the people, and we know with the mass immigration and the displacement, as well as the assault on all its cultures, well, then how can you say it's truly Ireland?
Yeah. I mean, the culture of Ireland is whatever the Irish people decide it to be, ultimately.
Yeah,
And so if the people aren't intact and aren't in a place where they can exercise their sovereignty in a coherent, integrated kind of way, they're not going to basically have. It doesn't really matter. Like all of that stuff is kind of culture war stuff that doesn't really matter that much, you know.
Yeah, and maybe our next conversation might be about what is it to be Irish, because I mean that would be a great discussion because obviously, as I said, intuitively we know what it is, but we're forced to kind of articulate it now.
Yeah, I mean, I've got all kinds of ideas about that because I think a lot of this kind of performative kind of republicanism, for example, I think a lot of that is like a kind of a reaction to being to a kind of a situation that is unhealthy, you know,
Mm,
kind of clinging to this kind of like, you know, if you don't do this, you're not Irish. But you know, but anyone who gets off of an airplane is can become Irish. You know, there's all these kinds of inconsistencies and um like I'm Irish. I know who I am. I don't need to prove anything. You know, I think people get very like caught up on kind of like trappings of Irishness or whatever. You know, and I
Well,
think you see it even in the populist thing. You know, people they want to get the flag out there, want to get the flag out, but like it's kind of like it's nice, but like it's also kind of like it speaks to a kind of a an insecurity perhaps like that people feel that they're under this like intense assault, like you know.
mm. Like I mean, if you think of it, I mean, if you could transpose every Irish person to I don't know Madagascar and take all the people from Madagascar to Ireland, would we still be Irish? And it's kind of a bit of a Theseus's ship kind of scenario, but I would argue no, because the landscape, its history, everything, our DNA, they're all contributors as markers of our identity. And
Yeah,
that's why you can't dismiss the fact that we are Northern European people, like we
yeah,
are Gaels, we are a smidgen of Norman, a smidgen of Viking, whatever, but that still doesn't vitiate the fact that we are still Irish as a people.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, I agree. And I'll just finish up the last Green Fez 21 says, I'm not ready to give up on old Ireland quite yet.
Yeah,
Soulful Ireland, basically
yeah.
says. So yeah, that's how I kind of view it. Like I think there was a lot of what made this country an interesting place really was the kind of soul of the place and the kind of authenticity, the kind of the decency, the
Mm.
general kind of decency in people and
Community.
community. Yeah, all these things that have been undermined really, because I'm basically just pursuing what happened in the rest of the Anglo-American kind of sphere
Mhm.
of liberalism. Um,
And it's
and
not an idealism either that everything was perfect. I don't think
no,
any nationalist says that. I mean, that would be absurd. But the point is that there was something centrally stabilizing, right? That was there, that was present. There was this sense of community, there was a sense of shared history, a shared belonging, a shared belief that we knew who we are, and most certainly a shared faith, whether people like to admit it or not. Like this for
yeah,
one
well, I mean,
thousand
there wouldn't be a
years.
national movement without the faith ultimately, like because back in the original before, long before 1798 and all, it was Catholic counter reaction was the basis of
Yeah, I mean the
cohesive coming
Confederacy.
together.
Yeah, during the 1600s, the
Yeah,
a lot of people dismissed the fact that during 1916, during the GPO, the Rosary was recited. James Connolly converted or reverted to the Catholic faith before he was executed. So a lot of those things you cannot. I mean, even Eamon McCann wrote an article almost kind of not dismissively, but kind of reluctantly to say, listen, whether we like it or not, Catholicism did play a huge role. And
yeah,
I think that's why, in a way, that people are trying to kind of eliminate Catholicism because Gramsci knew that you get rid of the cultural markers, the cultural pillars. That's then, and it should come as no surprise that once the church was weakened, that that Ireland has fallen fairly rapidly. I don't think anybody can genuinely argue against that. Now, it
yeah,
might be just correlation, but at least it requires an explanation.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree, and I think we'll call it there.
Good
That's a
man,
good way
Rod.
to
Thanks
finish.
for having me on.
So, absolutely, thanks for coming on. I'll be doing a stream. I think I'll be doing a stream next week. I think that'll be arranged. I won't announce it yet. But regardless, I'll be back within a week or two anyway. And I'll just say goodnight to everyone. If you want to follow Bosco, his links are in the description of this stream/video, and my links are there as well. And I'll just play us out with a tune and some end credits. And thanks, everyone. I'll talk to you very soon.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, everyone.